But yeah, I mean, my name's never been all that secret on here anyway, just because I'm a quasi-public
Oh no
like
no, yeah, yeah.
person.
And here's
But
the
not
thing.
necessarily.
Well, it's not
But
even just that. It's because that's all. That would also have like information like identifying stuff for the computer is why I want to avoid it. Because once you like even as just a commenter, I know that there are things that other people can do in some of these programs that can then give them access to other files on your computer and shit like that. It's just better safe than sorry. Because I don't know all of the things they can do now. I just remember shit that I could do in the 80s, and I guarantee you it's worse today than anything I learned.
well, also I have my own like dedicated Gmail that I use for work, which is not the same as my personal Gmail. So kind of separation there for me.
Yeah, some of it. Now, that being said, welcome everybody. This is Dante Alighieri's Digital Apparatus with Jack, Rich, and Despy. We are on Canto 4 this week. We are going to get into hell, and we passed a famous line last week, and in this line we passed several, almost a dozen famous names that many people in the audience will remember. So like we're gonna get to some fun conversation today. There is a longer second portion, like reading portion to this week because like this one is so whoever ends up going second, sorry you end up getting really chuffed for your first portion because it's
Jack,
bigger. So
don't mean to cut you off here, but I'm looking at your stream and there's literally no video, and the audio sounds like you're a mile away.
yeah, hold on. Let me. This stupid thing didn't do that thing. Is it there now?
I have to wait
Yeah.
for the lag.
I'm gonna eat some pickled herring.
And the reason I sounded like I was semi a mile away is because of my torch going. I didn't want that.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's working now.
So, let's get Discord back open. Um, so
Looks like we're not up now.
yeah, that's because I had OBS alt tabbed open. Now it will start running now that I have the Discord pop up as my forefront.
Oh no, I meant like I can see the Discord window. It's just that we don't have any of our video on the Discord window itself. There, now we do.
Yeah, that's because when it is alt tabbed and it is recessed into the background, the video freezes to minimize resources because of settings I have set in my video stuff. So it's like anything that gets kicked all the way to the background in my alt tab list immediately freezes all video components to minimize RAM usage.
Okay.
But on the flip side,
Sounds good.
yeah, that comes from when I game. Um, the videos I'm running to listen to shit in the background don't eat up stuff on my video card or my RAM. Now that being said, um, we are going to get to several of the famous names, historical famous names, that I think people who have never read Dante will be surprised at being included. Um, like there's a lot of things that Dante talks about that people who've never read him, it's amazing like how surprised they're like, wait, I know about that from this class or that class, etc. Like they hearing it in Dante surprises them. I noticed this with Diogenes with my daughter. My daughter has never read Dante. And when I was prepping for this week, she heard me mention something about the Diogenes. She's an actress, she knows, but Diogenes is what it is. Like she understood the Greek playwright. She never read Dante to understand that it would be
Which
inside
Diogenes? The dog?
Euripides.
Hmm.
All right, Jack, I will say this, that your voice is about at half the volume of Rich and Mine's on stream.
Okay, let me turn that up.
Which means that your keyboard is probably at the volume of just fine.
Well, considering my
Yes.
keyboard is actually a good distance away.
Okay.
Okay. I'm looking at my levels now. Because I had to turn it down last week because for some reason I was coming through hot as shit last week. Like I was peaking in almost all the way to mid yellow. Um, let's back up to the right levels. Okay, so right, now I should come through very appropriately. Now, as I was saying, like she's the playwright, no idea about like Dante. It's one of these things where it's the level of interconnectedness that he uses. It goes into, as we were talking about all the other weeks, the multi-layered meaning that he brings into this. He will bring cultural and social commentary in as like tangential side notes to the primary stories medium. Because for some reason, and we won't necessarily know his intent even with our best estimation, but for some reason he felt it so important to bring it up here. Specifically right now, right here, as opposed to, going into greater detail as to why this is a social commentary he felt warranted. So we then have to rely on people like Sayers and Chiardi and things like this who then interpret, well, he was a contemporary of this person, and the reason he brings this up may be this. And like, to me, that's wholly unsatisfying because we're never gonna really know what Dante wanted, and that bugs me. But it's interesting because he brings up very specific things that in this particular time period are kind of if you know situations. And so it's like, why did he feel the need to bring it up? Who was he trying to quote unquote silently communicate to? Because only a hyper finite amount of the population would even understand the social commentary in the time period which he wrote it. And was he trying to like say, hey, stop fucking up to the person that he was trying to get his point across to, or was it more of a let's teach the populace through an example of you? Especially considering we're in hell.
So I'm sorry. Which part are you talking about?
As we get to the list of the names, the famous names, why he listed these,
Oh, I
how
thought
this
you
would.
did a particular name.
No. Well, it's as we get into the list of names, why he chose to use them in this part of hell. His contemporaries that would have understood what he was saying, which would have been few, but even those, like, who was he talking to? What was the message he was trying to get across to them? Because it is used at the very beginning of hell, which means that to him this is the lowest of the low for whatever reason. So like everything he brings up here has a different layer of significance to it. Whether he's trying to draw the juxtaposition of like its difference between this layer of hell and everything else, or if it trying to show that its justified position within its layer of hell, etc. He always has a reason for why he put something there, and this is the one area where like it's all just conjecture. Nobody fucking knows why he included these names here. Like, who was he talking to? What message was he trying to send to his contemporaries, etc.
Although honestly, like, I might not mind being mentioned in this part of hell, because there are a lot of people that he's actually trying to compliment or lift up by putting them here, as opposed to like in the circles.
And I understand what you mean, but that's kind of what I'm getting at. Is it's that juxtaposition. What was he trying to comment on? Like, we take that meaning now. Stop yelling at me, cat. We take that meaning now. What was he trying to say to the? And I'm going to be very flippant with the number because I haven't looked at population demographics of the time period. The 35,000 potential people, in Italy and France around him, that may have had the education level and experience level in Florence to understand like some of the social commentary he's trying to get out to in some of this message. What was he trying to say to them? What message would they have taken from this? Was this these are the people you need to emulate? and even they are damn, like, what was the message he's trying to bring to his contemporaries here, because that's the part that's been lost to time. We can get all the parts within the story, but what he was trying to say to his contemporaries is what's been lost to time, and that's what I'm curious about.
Yeah, and there's a particular aspect of that that I think is interesting, that we'll get to when we get to this part. I think it's within Canto 4, where he explains why Virgil was necessary, because Virgil was capable of. Virgil is virtuous in ways that even Beatrice is not. Like, just because you've made it to heaven doesn't mean that you have all 7 virtues. And because we know, because we've talked about this earlier, that Virgil has 4 of the 7 virtues. He has the 4 cardinal virtues. He's better at those 4 than a lot of people who have all 7 virtues.
Yeah, in fact, I was reading, God, I forget the scholar's name now, forgive me. I've read so fucking many of them in the last week. But he basically was saying that Virgil was so virtuous in those 4 that it was what put him directly at that line, because he was as good can be without the sacred virtues.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And we'll get to that part. Okay,
Yep.
I'm listening, but
Yep.
I'm at a critical part of my coffee making.
Nope,
So,
you were fine.
reading.
I'm going to get to reading. Okay,
Okay, good.
so this is the beginning of Canto 4. Broke the deep lethargy within my head a heavy thunder, so that I upstarted, like to a person who by force awakened. And round about I moved my rested eyes, uprisen erect and steadfastly I gazed, to recognize the place wherein I was. True is it that upon the verge I found me of abysmal valley of abysmal valley dolorous, that gathers thunder of infinite ululations. Obscure, profound it was, and nebulous, so that by fixing on its depths my sight, nothing whatever I discern therein. Let us descend now into the world of the blind, began the poet, pallid utterly. I will be first, and thou shalt be second. Okay, so the reason I stopped it here is because, again, like, this is my own personal idiosyncrasy. Why the fuck did Longfellow and Chiardi both choose ululations here when that word doesn't have a direct translation to the original Ovid language? Like, that's like, why is that word here? Like, there has to be a reason for it even in this translation. Because, like, when you go back to the way that it's described in the Italian, as Ancom, like, explained to us, like, it doesn't mean ululations in Italian either. It's more talking about, like, the loud war cries, which we now attribute to ululations when we separate the Abrahamic faiths into Judeo-Christian and Islam. Like, the ululations being a highly negative thing were from that conflict. So it's like, why did Longfellow choose to use it here, and why did Chiardi choose to use it here, like, almost 100 years later?
What line is that specific?
Ululations, it's the 9. Sorry. Because it's the same way that it was worded in Canto 2, I think it was the last time this word appeared, and Ancom explained, like, it in Italian means something slightly different about, like, just general, like, hoots and hollers and war crimes, and, like, it doesn't have, like, a direct corollary translation, like, it gets transliterated.
I mean, there's something sort of animalistic about it. You leave it, right? Sort of dehumanizing way of describing it.
Yeah,
And
I
we
mean,
talk about passions here, right? Right? The passions sort of control you instead of you controlling them. So maybe that's why, and maybe the implication of that word in Italian at the time it was written, as opposed to now. This
yeah.
could all be.
Okay, yeah. The other thing is the way that he paints this is oddly beautiful to me, which I think is something that people, like, depending on their philosophical bent, tend to lose in this section of hell is he is describing what is supposed to be like the worst of the worst place in existence, yet he also gives it a kind of like ethereal beauty that I think was intentional. I think this is the humanist side of, and this is my opinion and a couple other scholars' opinions, but that this is him trying to show there's beauty everywhere. Like, no matter where, no matter how dark, no matter, like how bad everything looks, there's beauty everywhere. Despy, you've been quiet.
I don't really have much to add,
Okay.
honestly.
Well, if you would like to take the next portion of the reading, by all means.
Sure. And I, who of his color was aware, said, how shall I come, if thou art afraid? Who art won't be a comfort to my ears. And he to me, the anguish of the people, who are below here in my face, depicts that pity which for terror thou hast taken. Let us go on, for the long way impels us. Thus he went in, and thus he made me enter. And foremost circles that surround the abyss, there, as it seemed to me from listening, were lamentations none, but only sighs, that tremble made the everlasting air. And this arose from sorrow without torment, which the crowds had, that many were and great of infants and of women and of men. To me, the master good, thou dost not ask what spirits these, which thou beholdest are.
I know,
Now
it's so clunky.
Yes, now will I have thee know, ere thou go further, that they sinned not, and if they merit had, 'tis not enough, because they had not baptism, which is the portal of the faith thou holdest. And if they were before Christianity, in the right manner they adored not God. And among such as these am I myself. For such defects, and not for other guilt, lost we are, and are only so far punished, that without hope we live on in desire.
Yeah, it gets a little clunky near the end, unfortunately. That's why I apologize, because it's like I have to include the whole speech portion, and it's like that's why I apologize before we ever started reading. Second person gets kind of screwed.
Yep, it's all good.
It gets clunky mainly because like our modality of speech is not like this anymore. If we still spoke with a lot of these and thous, even in like doing like Shakespearean shit and like older plays, this would probably flow off our tongue much more easily.
Yeah.
Like I screwed up because I stammer and stutter and shit like that, but. Like, I read through my area, and I'm like, oh, this is great. And then I read through the next area, and I'm like, shit. I'm making people walk on Legos. Because I know Rich loves Virgil, but, like, Rich, you have to admit, his opening speech as he entered hell is, clunky even in the Sayers translation.
Yeah, I mean, clunky certainly in the translation. I think Sayers, if anything, is a harder translation to do, because I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but Sayers is actually translating into the Terza Rima, so the Sayers actually has the original rhyme scheme in it, which is not natural for English, and so very often Sayers especially is going to have to sometimes use two words as a translation for one, or vice versa. In order to make everything work. This is one of the reasons why I'm not as big of a fan of her translation as I am of her Apparatus, because she's given herself an extra burden here. But I will say, like, this means that she must be incredibly talented if she can put on that extra burden and still have, a translation that's enjoyable to read or whatever. But so I don't know how much of that is a clunky Italian, or how much of that might be even Latin. I wouldn't be surprised if Virgil drops into Latin every once in a while, because Dante understood it. His readers would have kind of understood Latin, so it would make sense to drop into it every once in a while. And of course, it would especially make sense for Virgil too, because Virgil isn't just somebody who wrote in Latin. He was the Latin writer. Like, prior to Virgil, no one ever wrote in Latin because it wasn't considered fancy enough. If you wanted to write an epic, or if you wanted to write something important, you would write it in Greek. And Virgil, he writes the Aeneid in Latin, and it's so good that it makes Latin okay to write in. Like, from then on, you can write in Latin. It becomes the official language of propaganda. But prior to him, so I can see maybe how his way of speaking might sound different than Italians who are speaking in this play. I don't know.
Well, it's more the way that it is worded. In fact, it even tripped Despy up to where he reversed two words the same way that I fucking did when I read through it. Because of the way that it is uncommon nowadays to say "are we." First time I read through, I did "we are" in my head too. So it's like when he did it, I didn't even bother stopping for the correction, because I'm like, nope, did the same fucking thing. Because we don't do that anymore. We just don't.
Right. Even when we stopped doing it, poets often will do it to preserve the meter of something.
Yeah.
Right?
Or to preserve the rhyme scheme.
And maybe you need a stressed following an unstressed syllable, and so you're just going to reverse words because of it.
Yep.
Today we call that a Yodaism. But
that, which is funny that a bunch of fucking Star Wars and Star Trek nerds somehow reversed a Yodaism in their head.
Lost are we?
It's called antimetaboly. That's the poetic term for it, for doing a Yodaism.
See, this is why we have you, Rich, because I would have never even thought to look up that fucking word.
Yeah. Antimetaboly just means the reverse of what you would normally say, right? Anti. And it's super, super common. It's one of the most common tropes in poetry.
I would have just called it an alliteration or a slight.
Well, no, alliteration is when you repeat consonants in words. That's different.
No.
Antimetaboly is when you change the order of the words, which is what a Yodaism is too. So you can just say Yoda.
Yeah, I mean,
You'll call it syntactic liberty.
Yeah. More people know Star Wars than poetic.
Yeah. Oh man, Discord is being a bitch right now. You guys keep freezing everyone, so I hope that's not happening on the stream. It's just happening to me. Yeah, every once in a while it's just like, oh Jesus. Because then you keep talking and I'm like, so it's like instantly noticeable when it happens. It's like, now, I think there's also an intentionality here that while this would have flowed much more easily in Italian, and even in the way that Longfellow and Sayers translated originally, because like you're dealing with people who are much more educated in language, generally dealing with this stuff. I think there's intentionality here because it's also trying to delineate the level of disconnected communication between Virgil and Dante, and as they progress through hell, their communication gets more and more clear. Like, if you notice, like, the modality of Virgil's speech changes over the rest of the cantos of the Inferno, and they speak much more effectively and clearly as time goes on. But I think that was part of the intentionality Dante was putting here is Dante, the character, loved Virgil and understands all this, but he still wasn't prepared for 200 years difference in their speech, and he's trying to, in a very small way, like indicate that with the clunkiness of Virgil's speech to Dante.
No, I mean, this could also be Virgil in the sense of not having spoken verbally to people in a long time, just
Yeah,
using language again for the first time
yeah, that could be
in a
true.
long time.
Since we took, the last Canto or the Canto before, we were talking about his voice was so hoarse from non-use for so long.
Right.
Right.
Oh man, see, this one we're gonna fly through quicker. I should have prepared both Cantos.
I mean,
I should have knew it.
as somebody that works in like language studies, like the way things make sense in your head and the way things like you hear things and they make sense in your head, that process from understanding to production isn't always a one-to-one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
You understand a lot more than you can produce.
and some. Well, see, sometimes vice versa, because depending on the familiarity between you and the person, you can go into a shorthand and produce like
Well,
far more than either technically gets. But I get what you're saying, man. Sorry,
right,
my
Yeah.
own autism just kicked in there. My bad. It's just like,
right.
well, sorry. It's just one of those things because when you're dealing with specifically with language, as you know, the dramatic difference between the written and spoken language also like comes into play on this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not even just like the thought to spoken; it's also the spoken to written and thought to written that like changes a lot of this as well. Um, because tone is one of the most difficult damn things to translate into text. That all.
You know,
Go ahead.
as long as we're towards the beginning of this thing, there was something from Canto 2 that I think we talked about this a little bit
Go ahead.
in the group DM, but when so this is Canto 2 and it's verse 74. I'll praise thee many a time to him. So basically it's Beatrice telling Virgil, hey, if you help me with this project to save Dante's soul, I will praise you to God. Many a time, many a time. Basic all. By the way, people always ask about like why Catholics like ask for intercession from the saints. Happens all the time in Dante. It's happening all the time. This is another intercession, but this is an intercession for somebody who's already in hell. Who, for the rest of the play, we're going to be told multiple times he will never get out. And so, what's the point of this intercession? Like, what good does it do Dante for Beatrice to praise him to God? Like, he's not getting out. So, is there some other form of reward, or maybe a good deed is its own reward, sort of thing? In which case, it starts to come up against. I think that there are multiple points in the comedy where it's not at all clear why Virgil must be in hell like for eternity. Like I think there's at least an apparent contradiction here. Like there's some tension at the very least. And I just thought I'd ask what you guys think of that uncertainty.
I think that Virgil is a virtuous person,
Mm-hmm.
and he is not necessarily looking at this as like transactional.
Right.
I think
I agree, and that's one of the things that makes me wonder. Okay, then maybe that's an indication that he doesn't belong in hell for all eternity.
Mhm. Well, I mean, God can hand out a +1 anytime he wants. He really can. So I mean,
We'll later find out. Like, with Gregory the Great praying for who was it, the Trajan,
yeah.
that he can intervene, and it can be because of an intercession from somebody else. In that case, it was
Hmm.
Gregory. Although Gregory has a power that Beatrice does not, right? Because he has the keys. He has the
Right.
power to bind and loose,
But
which means
then again, let's go back to see who sent Beatrice then.
mm-hmm.
I think she might have a little sway.
She does, yeah. She also has really good real estate, right? Rachel. So her next door neighbor is pretty powerful, and of course, that chain of who is it? And then there's Saint Lucy above her. So it's Mary who asks Lucy, who asks Beatrice, or is there someone else?
No,
It's
that's the three.
Lucia? Is it
Well,
Lucy or Lucia?
Lucia, but
Lucia, but Lucy is what
Yeah.
we call her in the English world.
Okay.
yeah, and like as I said in the group chat when we were talking about this, like the whole point of this, way it was explained to me by my father, and I'm sure he got this from our fucking priest. It signifies the intercessory prayers and acts how it influences souls within God's designs. By celebrating Virgil in like all of his virtues and contemporaneous thoughts, she's invoking divine assistance not only for Dante but in emphasizing interconnectedness of all souls.
Right.
Like it's about like talking about the economy of salvation, which, by the way, like even when I was a Catholic, blew my fucking mind that there was an economy of salvation. And like we'll get into that one another fucking day.
Well-
But like it's that it's not specifically to help Virgil. It is specifically her saying this gives hope to Dante.
So when you're talking about the economy, are you talking about the metaphysical economy or the physical economy that existed for this?
When we're talking the economy of salvation in Catholic
Dante,
terms, we're talking about the metaphysical. But like as Rich just said, yeah, like Dante was meaning, yeah, quit selling fucking indulgences, douchebag.
Right. And that's what's important, right? That just because there is an economy of salvation doesn't mean that the way the church was doing it at the time is okay, right? Like if you look at the root of the word economy, even, and I understand that this isn't a word Dante uses, so it doesn't really matter, but still, it means the study of the household, right? Like oikos means home. And so the way that you manage your affairs, that's what an economy is, right? And what is salvation but a consequence of the way you manage your affairs? Like
Yep.
it literally is an economy in at least in an etymological sense.
Well, yeah, but it's also like when we're now talking, because of the time period, very much the Catholic economy of salvation. We're not even to ignore the worldly because we all know how fucked that is. There is also an economy of salvation within the Catholic faith structure of like it is about a certain level of what you do where you go. Power of good works and all that. Like this isn't me like bashing them. I'm just being quick for the sake of brevity. It's the economy though never made sense to me because according to Catholic, like almost every other Christian belief, quite literally the baseline of that economy is believe. Nothing else. You could literally be the most horrible, horrific fucking human that has ever lived. Believe and ask for forgiveness, and you're good. You're equal with everybody else. Like that never fucking made sense to me, ever.
I mean, there's parables in the Bible that literally allude to that. I mean, you look at the what is it? The guy that owns the vineyard and hires the two guys. One has basically been working all day, and the other's only been working for an hour, and they get paid the same. Like this is literally a parable directly in the Bible.
Right.
It just never made sense to me because that does not seem like an economy. That sounds like a fucking absolute indoctrination. Like even like in this level, because like even in the parable, it's no matter how bad anything is, believe in your equal, and that like to a point, yes, all humans are equal. We start from an equal starting point. But that doesn't mean that once you do all the horrible acts, once you do this one thing, you're suddenly equal again. Like that never made sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I can steel man that. I think,
Which is why I
I think
brought it up.
also, yeah, yeah. Ultimately, it comes down to what uh, it comes down to the relative size, right? So you know math, you understand what happens when you start comparing something to infinity, or very large numbers, right? Any amount of
Or hyper finite numbers, yeah, it gets ridiculous.
yeah, any amount of virtue, unless it's infinite virtue, is going to fall short, and it's going to be the same fraction, so to speak, as what the expectation is from God, right? And that's why it's possible to get there, right? Because there are in Christian mythology and in Jewish mythology, there are a couple of people who reached the level of righteousness to where they went straight to heaven, right? No purgatory
Hmm.
for them, and so they reach that, I guess you would say, infinity or zero sin, that level of zero sin, right? But everybody else, if they have a little bit of sin or if they have an absolute ton of sin, is going to be relative. Is going to be is going to be the same proportion of a percentage of infinity, right? Or they're going to all fall short of the glory of God in this by the same amount. But if you're not measuring at God, if God is not the measure, if man is the measure, or if there's some other finite measure, then there are going to be differences. And the fact that there are differences is why we have purgatory. It's why we have circles. It's because everything is relative to one
Yeah,
another.
and this is why I'm not
This
a
leaning
Catholic
on,
anymore.
hold on, this leaning on the infinite, this leaning on the idea that there you don't have gradations and you can't make distinctions is a very Protestant idea. Actually, more an evangelical idea, right? The idea that that faith alone is what you need, right? And the Catholics really more believe faith without works is dead. If it weren't for that, then this
Well,
would be a
yeah,
very
no, I
it would
agree, but
heaven and hell.
but for that moment before, like, as you ask forgiveness and
Hmm.
take it in, until you start doing good works. Like, obviously there's a temporal fucking barrier there. You have to have time to start doing the good works. During that time
Right.
period, that's the part that never made sense to me, and this is why I'm no longer a Catholic, because the argument from incredulity, I'm really good at fucking math. Give me the number. I'll work it out for you. I'll show you the damn difference. Like,
Right. I think
no,
not
no, I know
necessarily.
what you mean. I'm just saying, like, that was my objection. That's all.
Yeah, and I think what I'm saying is, I think the people who lean on this the most, which would be the evangelicals, they would just tell you, yeah, do the math, divide it by infinity, and see what you come up with. And what you'll find is that everyone's equal. That's what they would
Divide
say.
infinity by zero.
Well, see, I
Yeah,
understand the
yeah.
apologetics, and this is why
Right.
I was
How much
hoping you would
sin
use a
does God
slightly.
have?
Well, this is why
Versus how much sin do we have, right? And so you're dividing by zero,
well,
easy,
see,
right?
this is why when you said you could steal man, I was hoping I'd get slightly different than just like the baseline, like, apologetic for it, because, like, to me this is an argument from incredulity, because the
Yeah, I
presupposition
just
is that it is infinite rather than just a really, really, really large number,
Yeah,
and
the reason I responded that way is only because you put it in math terms. So I
yeah,
wanted
I
to give
know.
you math.
No, no, I understand that, but this is my point. It is a presupposition that math term, the opposite side of this fraction line, is an infinity. It could just be 2.1 times 10 to the 250th power. It could be just some exceptionally
And
large number.
the God side, you mean?
Yeah, the infinity
Oh,
side.
right. I think Gillespie corrected me, and he gave me the better analogy, which is dividing by zero. Right? God
Well, no,
has
he was doing both. He was compounding it, of infinite, divide infinity by zero. But
Oh
here's the
yeah.
thing: in theoretical mathematics,
We're not
we've
infinitely.
done that.
Yeah.
Which
Well,
is
my
why it made me. Which is why when he said that, I go, "This is why I'm no longer a Catholic."
Yeah, in my analogy, it's God is the zero zero sin, right? And then humans are the numerator. So we don't have infinite sin. Uh, at least, well, I don't think we
No,
do.
no. By
Uh,
by definition, we cannot, because we are
Right.
finite creatures. This is my point. So if you reverse the equation and God is the zero and we are the large number, that my point
Well,
makes even more sense.
not everybody is baptized, so therefore, people who are unbaptized are in a state of infinite sin.
No, no, no.
I'm gonna get you for that joke later, but
They're in a state of sin that is not divided by zero, right? Because you don't get, or
judged by the same yardstick if you
yeah, well,
remember
Yeah,
actually,
and
it is
form.
divided by zero. Grace is the one that takes that division by zero away, or whatever, right?
yeah.
And just subtracts what
Yeah, and
he.
that's why he
But
got me to smirk and
I
say I'm gonna
mean,
get him for that joke later.
but
Press all of this mathematically, like sort of
the
formally, it'd be fine.
the other thing is that like what is it like when we're talking about works, like works can be rather minor things at the same time. It's not like somebody has to go out and proselytize in order
It can
for
be
them
bake
to have
bread
like
for the
completed
little old
work.
granny who has arthritis down the street.
Not
It can
even
be
that. Not even that. It can be something just it could be as simple as, let's just say, somebody literally taking and then like converting there on the spot, turning to the person next to them and say, "Pray for me," or "I will pray for you," and you've literally done
I
works.
mean, but that's what it means in modern time. That was not what it meant in the time period of when the scripture was written, nor when Dante would have.
Right, but what I'm saying is like the measure by which we calculate works and the measure by which the what is it? Like the Catholic Church would determine how works would be calculated is not necessarily as like I don't want to say like in the forefront of like people have to like visibly see you doing them in order for them to be considered works.
No, and that's why I put us in that temporal barrier. Like before he
Right.
can even get to doing works. And this is my point. Like in modern times, yes, it can be as little as turning to your neighbor and saying, "Pray for me," or "I'll pray for you." That's bullshit. Um, as we will get into in a few
Well,
as we will get into
well.
in the next reading section. But um, like this is why I gave it the simple one of taking some bread down to the little old lady who's got arthritis because she can't bake anymore. Not because you're doing it specific to take it to her, but because you have it. You're taking it to her. That kind of shit. Like it doesn't even have to be a great level of horrible or of divine intentionality. It can quite literally just be, oh, I care about my neighbor. Let me go give her some bread because she couldn't bake some today because her hands hurt. Like
My favorite professor, actually, the one who taught me Dante, one of his favorite things to say was that if you drop a gum wrapper on the ground, he says, in that moment, you have experienced a little piece of hell. Because the the basically the thoughtlessness that you have for your fellow man, someone else will take care of it or whatever, is essentially the soul of what hell is.
um, I it's an interesting concept. I disagree with it, but it's an interesting concept because that's very Sartre-esque, and I now wonder because of how much you've brought up
He
Sartre in
was
the
he was
past.
he did no sorry.
So I'm now wondering if you like get some overflow from his existentialism into this take.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Well, I mean,
Well,
we are the sum of our experiences.
the,
So
the one the one thing I was going to talk about also was like when we were talking about like the economy of salvation, that there are certain acts that they're not necessarily what is it that require a monetary transaction that that lessen like your time in like purgatory, like dedicating like a rosary, what is it to somebody that is in purgatory is supposedly supposed to like lessen the time there. There's no actual monetary transaction to that. It's just it's like a request of
Well, yeah,
intercession.
this is going back to the intercessory prayer of Beatrice. And this is kind of what I'm getting at. But at least when we then go back into reality as opposed to the belief, um, this is essentially the placebo effect for the people that know you did it. Whether they saw you do it or not, when you tell them, "Oh, I prayed for blank in hell," like, "Oh, I
Hmm.
like the, the, it's only a placebo effect of hope for those people, that if they end up there, that they can be helped too. And that, like, that seems,
You mean like as they're doing it in a transactional way?
no, that, like, when, for example, I pray for, I don't know, you die, you went to hell, I'm praying for you in hell. The people who hear me say this, it is hope for them that if they think they're good people, but they die, they end up in hell, that that they can also be prayed and helped out of that situation too. Like
Okay.
it seems like a placebo effect for the masses, not because of anyone's intentionality, because I don't think like this is like an intentional like malfeasance thing, but it really does seem like it is for hope for the living, because the dead are dead. Like everything else is, even if you want to believe at that point, everything at that point's in God's hands. Like,
There is in fact a time of the year where you get to do this. It happens on All Souls Day.
mhm.
You're
Yep.
not really praying for people in hell. You're praying for people in purgatory to be
Yep.
let out early, like to skip years, I should say. And I've actually done one of these.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a whole list of like circumstances in which you can do it. I think one of them, there was a particular church that you had to say a certain number of prayers in order to get it. And if you, there's some ways to get like divide the purgatory time by half or something like that, and then there's ways to like eliminate it entirely and stuff like there's specific rules or
Well,
whatever.
yeah, but that's why I wasn't speaking about purgatory, because we're not there yet. I was just speaking about intercessory prayer for people in hell, because that is still something that the Catholic Church teaches. You know this, because I got taught that as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not if there is, I'm not familiar with it, but I mean there's stuff I don't know, so
Yeah.
Okay,
I know that there's certain like extra stuff within the Catholic Church, like novenas, for example. Like novenas are supposedly like pretty powerful for helping people that are in purgatory. You also could go to like benediction, vespers, adoration. All of these things help with people's time in purgatory. There's what is it? There's multiple different ways to help people that are in purgatory, but it's not necessarily like your your purpose in doing that is not necessarily open to the public. I mean, you can even dedicate a mass like for like people and whatnot, but usually that information is not like open to the public in any way, shape, or
okay,
yeah,
what
I think the Trajan example, which we will eventually get to here, is one that is like super interesting because I'm not aware of anything like that in actual dog. Go
um,
ahead.
form. About anything like what
Of,
like
of releasing people's souls from hell. The
from
only
releasing
person,
people's soul from hell. I was
yeah.
talking more about purgatory than anything.
No. I
I
know
have
you're doing Trajan. I'm
I'm
just
also
talking.
on this. I'm in the
Yeah.
same boat as you were. Intercessory prayers for people in hell. I didn't even know that existed.
Yeah. I'm not aware of it
it
either.
is it is a much less common practice today, because of the more evangelical nature throughout Europe and America, pushing it on the Catholic faith for the last 100 years. But
I mean, I'm
no,
not
this
aware
is
of
this
it.
is, huh?
I'm not aware of it existing at all. But that doesn't mean it didn't. I'm not aware.
Well, let's put it this way: if it doesn't exist within the church, like law specifically, there's an awful lot of priests teaching it. That's all I got on that one, because like I was
Yeah.
specifically taught this by a priest.
Just take that.
Yeah, yeah. So like that's all I got on that, because I was taught this by my
There's no
priest.
shortage of priests with theological misunderstandings, right? Because especially now, because it's getting harder and harder to find people to be priests, and so some of the people who are priests are not your
Well,
most
Like
educated.
I know intercessory prayers for people in purgatory. I've never heard of
Yes.
an intercessory
Yes.
prayer for someone in hell.
um,
I've performed ones for purgatory. Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
and like I said, now this is where I don't want to derail too far, because we will derail far on this one. Some of
But it's
this,
relevant to these cantos, I
I,
think.
I
Yeah.
understand that, but this part may not be, because I have no idea how many of these Dante had access to that I'm about to bring up. Some of this comes from the now apocryphal books. Um, like this, like so. This is like I don't know how much Dante would have had
Maybe
access
why
to.
they
Well, see, that's where you and I are going to disagree because of no longer a member of the faith. Because to me, it was pulled out because it caused problems for the power structure of the hierarchy of the church, not because it wasn't widely taught. We have more copies of the Book of Enoch than we do the Book of Mark, yet it's not included.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that.
Yeah, so like this is all I'm getting at. So like, there's certain parts of it where, like, at least maybe there's like dogmatic like law that they keep in practice in the church that comes from these apocryphal books, and they just don't quote the apocryphal books anymore. They just now just say, hey, this is a church thing, this is a ritual we do, etc., etc. And it's just been used less and less over time. I don't know, but I know at least my priest and many other priests up around Detroit definitely fucking taught this because it wasn't about getting them out of hell. It was about like getting them into like a better place of hell, essentially hoping, like if we're talking in Dante's topology, getting them into the castle of light.
Yeah, okay, I can tell you my understanding. My understanding of it. This is the way. Uh, there's textual evidence for this too. The idea is you can pray for the dead, but because we are not certain. Like the church will say we can be certain of certain saints being in heaven, right? Because the church like has the power to bind and loose, and they can declare people saints. But you can't really say whether somebody is in purgatory or in hell because you don't know the state of their soul when they died, right? And so when you're praying for people who are dead, you may not be aware that they're in purgatory or that they're in hell. But if they are in purgatory, then your intercession benefits them. If they are in hell, then it doesn't. But that all of that is implied because priests don't like to alienate people by outright saying your relative is in hell. There's no hope for them, right? But
Right.
that is the dogma. I'm not aware. That there might be something that says you can pray for the dead, and then it doesn't mention the state of the dead. In fact, that's probably what most of those verses would say. But the only thing that we have, I mean, the textual evidence in the Gospels, Jesus specifically says that once you're in hell, that's it. There's no getting out.
Well, yeah,
It's
like I
really
said,
around that one.
well, that's why I said if we put it in, since we're talking Dante, because I don't want to derail too far, so I wanted to bring
No,
it back.
Dante violates this with
Yeah.
Trajan, which is why he's so fascinating.
No. What I was going to get at is, bringing it back to the topology of Dante. This wouldn't be about getting them out of hell. Although Dante does do that later. This would be about getting them from the deeper circles to closer to the castle, closer to the less horrible portions of hell. So, because like that's the part that like intercession.
No, I'm not aware of those either. But I mean, again, it might very well may be. I'm just
About,
not aware.
but I think what you were talking about is correct. It's because it is ambiguous about the dead as it's talked about. It
Right.
is, if they're in purgatory, it's about giving them less time. If they're in hell, it's about getting them a more gentle hell. They're not getting out of hell, just getting them to one of the more gentle.
Yeah, it's the
ones.
more gentle hell part that I have no like experience.
If-
Like it could be
yeah.
that something's there, but I've never heard that.
If I remember correctly, it's like once a person passes beatification is when the church like basically declares that the person is in heaven, but it's not. They have to be canonized to be a saint, if I'm not mistaken. Like those are the two step. That's the two-step process.
Yes,
The first one is determining
Well, I'm a
whether they're
little
in
bit
heaven.
ambiguous about that because if you're in heaven, you're a saint, right? So
Well,
No, not specifically.
No,
Oh.
it depends on if you perform miracles, because that's the part
Right.
of like the canonization process. Like beatification is basically them basically determining whether you are in heaven or not. Canonization is determined whether you performed at least 2 miracles over.
Yeah, you would be a
the
beatific body.
lifetime.
You would be a beatific
Yeah.
body, not a saint, just being in heaven. You would have
Yeah.
to have performed miracles, and more specifically, you would have had to have performed 3 or greater miracles as held
2.
by the 2 now.
Two.
When did they
Two.
change that? Because it used to be
I thought
3.
it was 2 for canonization and 1 for beatific, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, it's 2 for I know it's 2 for canonization.
Right.
Well, it used to be 3 miracles that you needed to become a saint. If they've changed it to 2, I'll have to look into what specific date they changed it, because it's going to be significant as to why. I just
Hey, you
don't
know something? They must be running out of patron saints, so they must need patron saint of furries. Patron saint of
no, that wasn't what I was meaning. But there had to be a reason, because they never do these things without a reason. Now, it could be PR, like you're suggesting. It also could have been some particular pope, and his canon lawyer found something in the documents that changed it. You know what I mean?
Was this part of a Vatican II change as well?
I don't
That's
know.
where I'll look into it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'll have to look into it, because I don't know.
I remember now, beatification, it has to do with the level of certainty. If you're beatified, you are considered to be in heaven.
Definitely.
But it doesn't mean we know for sure that you're in heaven. Whereas if you're canonized, the church is saying, no, it's certain, you're definitely in heaven. That's
okay.
Now, as far as like the implications, I'm not sure like how the wider body viewed it, but the way you're describing it is how I viewed it when I was still a Catholic. So like, I don't know which one's right, but that was my read on it too.
I mean, and the other thing is, when you were talking about the church using apocryphal texts, I mean, they used apocryphal texts all the way up until the Council of Trent anyway. And they've been using those. Well, no, but I'm just saying that they had been using, what is it, the Septuagint for 1,000 years before the Council of Trent, and then they finally decided to put it in the book anyway. So I mean, it wouldn't be an uncommon practice for them to use the other books, possibly.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like, that may be why it fell out. And then we also have the Protestant Reformation, which takes a further 6 books out of the Bible from the 88 that we know exist.
7 books.
Oh, yeah,
66
to 73. You're right. Sorry.
Septuagint means 7.
I slept very little last night. My mistake. Sorry. I was dealing. Slight further derail before we get back to the reading, which we will get back to right after this. Like yesterday, because of what happened in Louisiana, I was dealing with a lot of particularly, how shall we say this politely, zealous family members and friends online who are basically advocating for us becoming a theocracy. And so yesterday was quite full of typing. I haven't typed that much since I fucking finished the book in one day. Like, it was a lot.
I was gonna jokingly say that it's not the Sexuagint, it's the Septuagint.
Like I said, that's my mistake, because I slept very little. But now, because this again, 12th century is when they changed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to look up the specific reason why they changed it, because there'll be a reason given.
That was a little bit before you were born.
No shit. This is why I didn't know. Like, I
Not
read
much,
the old stuff, and I was like,
No.
no. He's the one who remembers when dirt was clean. I'm the one who remembers when fire didn't produce smoke.
And bushes burned a lot longer than you thought they would.
Now, before we get back to the reading, the reason that the reason that this matters, and for anybody who's watching, is, as I've brought up, I'm a pagan, and there are certain things in this country that if these people get what they want, I will no longer be able to live in this country. That is a very scary thing for somebody like me who is, well, not specifically born here. I was born on an American military base overseas. I was raised here a majority of my life, and it's kind of scary to think I may not be able to live in my home country anymore.
So just to be clear, prior to the 12th century, it was an indeterminate number of miracles. So it wasn't one, it was just, it says miracles, plural, so I guess it took at least 2. But for sanctity, it would only take 1 miracle.
Well, if you went by the list and like I guess the rulings by the College of Cardinals and all of the stuff that goes on in like creating saints, um, almost all on the list had three or more. So apparently they thought three was the minimum for a very long time.
Yeah, having multiple is certainly helpful,
Well, and
but it's
just
normally
just just to point this out, Catholic Church was got a little bit more strict on what they determined to be a miracle.
Yeah, I was about to say,
So,
for the fun of those in the audience, while we get back into the reading, um, while you're listening to us, look up the miracles of Saint Kevin. I dare you.
he could remove his thumb.
No, no, no.
I'm kidding.
He pulled
I'm kidding.
apples off a willow tree that he made grow instantly. One time while he was standing with his hands outstretched in prayer, a bird landed in his hand and laid an egg. And he stayed in that position until the egg hatched. And his final miracle was he convinced an otter to bring them salmon. But eventually one of the brothers wanted to kill the otter, so the otter left and never returned. That's literally one of his fucking miracles. The otter brought them fish.
I've got a better one on the Camino de Santiago. There's a city that has these holy chickens, and they have, in fact, to this day they have a problem with people trying to steal the holy eggs that come out of these chickens. But at any rate, the miracle comes from the fact that there was a couple that were marching towards Santiago because it was a pilgrimage, and they stop in a town, and they stop for a couple of days, and during that couple of days, it was a man and a woman and their son, and the son ends up messing around with the local while they were staying there, and when it comes time for them to leave, she's already fallen in love with him, and she demands that he stay with her. She says, "Well, no." He says, "No, I can't. We have to complete our pilgrimage. Like, I'm sorry, I've got to go." And so she accuses him of rape. To get back at him, and what happens? Make a long story short, they lynch him. So as the grieving parents are leaving the town because they still have to complete their pilgrimage, their son is like hanging from a tree. And then months later, when they're coming back the other way, because that's how this pilgrimages worked, is you walk all the way over there and then you walk back home. They're going through the same village. They pass that tree, and their son's body is still hanging on the tree, and it's perfectly preserved. And they're like, "Oh my God, this is a miracle!" Like, they go find the local town mayor and say, "Could you please cut our son off down from the tree? It's a miracle, And he doesn't buy it, and there's a big argument that ensues. And he is at home eating a chicken dinner. And at one point he says, "I will no sooner cut your son from that tree than these chickens will get up and dance a jig." And then, of course, the chickens get up and dance a jig. And the descendants of those chickens are held today in that local church. It's actually a cathedral, a local cathedral, small, modest cathedral. And the chickens are still there. It's really hilarious because the rooster can crow. Whenever the rooster starts crowing in the middle of Mass, everything stops and we have to wait for it to stop crowing. And then the poor beleaguered priest, continues. It's really funny.
Okay, Rich, since you gave us that great story, we'll go with you on the next reading. You're right.
Okay, hold on. What line do I start?
43 to 63.
Okay, I got it. Great grief seized on my heart when this I heard, because some people of much worthiness I knew, who in that limbo were suspended. "Tell me, my master, thou my lord," began I with desire of being certain of my faith, which overcometh every error. "Came anyone by his own merit hence, or another's who was blessed thereafter? And he who understands my covert speech?" Replied, "I was a novice in this state when I saw hither come a mighty one with a sign of victory incoronate. Hence he drew forth the shade of the first parent, that of his son Abel and of Noah, of Moses the lawgiver and the obedient, Abraham, patriarch and David king, Israel with his father and his children, and Rachel, for whose sake he did much, and others many, and he made them blessed. And thou must know that earlier than these, never were any human spirits saved.
Okay, so first of all, obviously stop there because it was the end of that particular speech. Second, because like it goes into quite a few points that like some of them are very obvious, some of them are not. Like, you know,
There's a little bit of a no duh here, right? Because if Adam is in there, and then it says no one earlier than that has ever been saved. There was no one earlier than Adam.
well, that depends on the
Obviously.
interpretation of the Bible, but yes, generally that is the agreed interpretation by Catholics,
Yeah. I mean, I'm aware of someone before
especially at this time period.
Adam.
Well, especially at this time period, like before, like we understood better in the Catholic Church accepted science, then nobody fucking understood there was somebody before Adam at this time.
He's probably talking about when they were saved, not when they existed. Because I guess what he's saying is, before these people were delivered from hell by Jesus, no human soul had ever been saved. That's probably what he means.
I mean, I suppose that's one way of taking it. I personally took it as he was explaining it in the way that there were no humans before this, as many others, and he made them blessed. Thou must know that earlier than these never were any human spirits saved.
Saved.
Yeah, but my point is like there were during Adam and Eve's time period in the garden, humans outside of the garden.
Yeah.
We just, at least according to Scripture, do not know specifically when they were made.
We're talking about the land of God, yeah.
Yeah, we just don't know specifically if they were made first or second. We don't. Now, generally, the dogmatic belief is second because Adam was first. But like at least scripturally, we have no evidence to say one way or the other. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get at here is like I think this is him to Dante playing very much to his time period where this is all they would have known. Like they didn't. Like I'd have to look it up. I think this may be before like a vast majority of like even the first fossils were found. Now, granted, back then they thought it was like dragon bones and shit. But like I think it's before like even the first of those were found. So like the whole idea of like deep time was beyond them at this point. Like there's no way they would have thought of like humans before Adam. What? They never even considered that.
Yeah, but looking at the specific wording here now, it seems clear to me that they're saying no one had ever been saved before. So this is about the time when Jesus visits hell.
Yeah.
Like no one was saved prior to Jesus going down and unlocking those souls.
I suppose. I always viewed it as the people who died in the land of Nod were the ones, because people would have been dying outside of the garden at this time, though they were the ones that would have been there before being saved, so on and so forth. But that's beside the point. That is a minor quibble of interpretation, because I was just basing it on Dante wouldn't have even thought about someone before. So, he had to have been talking about people who died before Adam. Adam lived for 900 fucking years. A lot of people died in the middle of that. Just saying.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the land of Nod is, so mysterious to us. I think it's probably just a piece of another myth that, made it into Genesis. But,
potentially, but yeah, that's why I said it's a minor quibble, and I don't want to derail too far over. We've already derailed a lot this episode.
But we are talking here about the harrowing of hell, right?
Yeah.
Which is referred to it's referred to in 1 Peter and in Ephesians at 2 different points. So there is scriptural indication that early Christians did believe in the harrowing of hell. I think this is fascinating because this is an indication that hell was not is not impossible to leave. It requires an intercession from Jesus himself, but there's your first loophole.
I'm not gonna lie. Every time I hear or like read about this part here, Thin Lizzy's jailbreak gets into my head every single time.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It is.
I'm just gonna let that one hang, and anybody who ends up watching this wants to figure out what the reference there. More power to you. Have fun. Because that was great. Um, for me, it was when I read this portion. Like, I didn't view it as like Jesus going there. I always viewed it as, because of the way and the order in which they put it here, it was trying to indicate that the first souls saved were also the first ones created, specifically in God's image, being Adam and his progeny. So like maybe that was my Irish Catholic upbringing coloring my reading of this book, but like that's always how I read it. How that the cult Pope Pius, whatever the hell it is, 12th.
Oh, Society of St. Pius X.
Yeah. How would they have viewed this, Despy?
With Jesus going in.
Yeah. Well, like, would it have been Adam and them being the first saved, or like that's?
Yeah. No, like quite literally, like the only.
Around it.
Yeah, I mean, but the only thing that really like societies like Society of St. Pius X and other societies like that, the only thing they disagree with is Vatican II. Like, they agree with everything else.
Well, yeah,
like,
but
quite
it doesn't
literally,
mean
that's the only thing.
Well, but it is always a logical question to ask, because as something gets separated, the longer it is separated, usually the more it diverges from the original. So I had to ask. Oh.
Right. Well, we're talking about something that's like 60 years, like, ago.
It's usually
like,
enough for stuff to start changing.
No, I'm just saying, like my dad,
they calcify,
who was born Catholic, was born and raised Catholic before Vatican II.
Yeah.
Yeah, they haven't changed. Another phenomenon like this is the Orthodox Church. Same thing.
Yeah.
In fact, they cannot change. Like, if they continued to have church councils of their own, then maybe they would have like evolved the way that the Roman Catholic Church has. But by their own rules, they cannot have a church council without Rome present. So as a result, the Eastern Orthodox Church is the same as it has been for centuries.
Over 1,000 years, because the Great Schism didn't happen till, like, what is it, 1055, something like that?
Yeah.
Well, which I always find interesting, because the Eastern Orthodox Church has this problem. Roman Orthodox and Ethiopian Orthodox do not, and I don't understand why. Like, beyond, like, is it just the rule of Rome that changes it? Or?
I'm just saying, Catholics like making rules and then making sure that they're ironclad.
That's what I mean, though. But when it comes to the Eastern Orthodox,
I can tell you why. It's because here's the disagreement. The disagreement was on whether or not you required all 12 patriarchs to be present in order to get something done. And so, like, was Peter the first among equals, which is what the Eastern Orthodox says, or was Peter supreme? And if he's supreme, then his authority alone is enough. And so, by the Roman Catholic Church's logic, all you need is the Roman Pope. In other words, the Roman Pontiff. Whereas according to the Orthodox, you need all 12. And you actually don't have to have all 12. Like, there can be a quorum or whatever. But you have to have Rome, because he's first among equals. He has to absolutely be present, and then they have to decide collectively. Well,
I understand.
It's a collective decision. According to Rome, it's an individual decision, and therefore, by the Roman logic, he can hold church councils.
I guess more my question wasn't this part, because this part I got was, why was it quote unquote other Orthodox churches somehow were able to change, but how are they able to get around this? Did they not have the rule of Rome that the Eastern Orthodox did?
They don't. Well, some of them No, you have to look at all of the church councils and say everything is still exactly the way it was then. However, you can always interpret a church council, right?
Okay.
So you can say, well, according
Okay,
to
well,
Nicaea,
that's where I was lost on me, because, like,
Yeah.
doing all the research into all of those separate
There's always another layer of
orthodoxies is,
interpretation, right? You can't have a church council, can't change dogma, can't do any of that. But you can point to it and say, well, what this really means is, and then have a different view. There's always another layer where you can get away with it.
that's why we have thousands
like how some
denominations.
people take the First Amendment and try to
Right.
say that it's written so that there's supposed to be, what is it, a Christian authority in the United States.
Right. Yeah.
Gonna
Exactly.
give me an aneurysm.
It's exactly like that. Like
Hey,
it would be as if there was a group of people who say you cannot amend the Constitution anymore. You don't have the authority to do that. However,
Jack, I'm just trying to use an analogy that might hit home a little easy.
I know you're still gonna give me an aneurysm.
no, I think it's a very good analogy.
It is. That's why it's gonna give me an aneurysm. Because it's like, oh god, I hate that. Ugh.
Like ideally, you would want to add an amendment to the Constitution, but if you can't, then you can just get the Supreme Court to reinterpret. Yeah, it's like that.
Yeah, well. Okay, so before we derail into politics, we cease not to advance because he spake, but still passing onward through the forest say I of thick crowded ghosts. Not very far as yet our way had gone, beside the summit, when I saw a fire that overcame a hemisphere of darkness, where a little distant from it still, but not so far that I in part discern not, the honorable people held that place. O thou who honorest every art and science, who may these be, which great honor have that from the fashion of the rest it parts them. This was the reason I stopped here again. Is just natural speech drop, but it's also, this is very significant to me because this is again where Dante's humanism came out to me, because he talks about the arts and the sciences, not the religion. He's bringing it to things that, well, sometimes have connection to it, sometimes are in direct opposition as well. Because it doesn't say that the great arts of the religion. It's every art and science, and he's trying to show that they themselves have their own delineated beauty and importance in the world.
There's something here that I thought was super interesting in terms of differences in translation. So what you read was overcame a hemisphere of darkness.
Uh-huh.
But Musa says a hemisphere of light that lit the dark. And then Sayers says a glowing hemisphere, which makes me think a hemisphere of light as well. And so I don't think these are contradictions. I think if you look at what is a hemisphere is that curved line, right, on the outside of half a circle. And on one side of that line is light and one side of that line is darkness. So it's interesting philosophically, do you consider that hemisphere to be a concave darkness or a convex light?
That would be an interesting. Well, could you do your best, because I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to open up that Google Doc while we're live. Would you try reading the Italian, because maybe that will help. Maybe because of the Latin may actually indicate hemisphere more obviously.
Yeah, I can tell you literally it's pretty easy to interpret. It's Chemisperio di tenebre vincia, or vincia, which would be a hemisphere that, I guess you would say, tenebre is like tener in Spanish. It means to have. So it's a hemisphere that has light, or a hemisphere that holds light. That would be literally light.
That could be illuminated. So either one could work technically, because holding light can be illuminated. Fire. Yes.
Right. It's a foco chemisphere. So it's a fire that emits light, and that light forms a hemisphere in the darkness. So both of these translations are correct, but it's interesting that the hemisphere itself is either a hemisphere of darkness that surrounds the light, or it's a hemisphere of light that pierces the darkness. But I mean, it's the same thing. Visually, you picture the same thing when you read
Yeah.
that. But I just think it's interesting that the identity of the hemisphere is what's
Yeah,
in.
we need a period Italian speaker to really tell us who was.
Oh, you know what? It literally, it's more a hemisphere that contains the light.
Yeah.
So it's almost as if the darkness is stopping the light from the fire from going past a certain point.
Well, this is why I said it could either be a hemisphere that contains the light, i.e., the fire and light are within the hemisphere,
Anybody
or
ever
it
see?
could, or it could be a hemisphere that is illuminated by the light, whether it contains the light in and of itself as a material. So either Musa or Sayers or Longfellow could be correct based on this wording. This is why I think it would be. It would have to be. We'd have to know somebody who knows 14th century Italian to be like any more specific.
Well, these are all sure, but these are pretty simple words.
Well,
Let
yeah,
me say this though. Let me say this. Has anyone ever seen True Detective?
Some of it, not all of it.
Season 1 of True Detective, at the end, there's this really great soliloquy where Rust says that he's constantly used to look at the night sky, and he would look at how black it is and how tiny the stars were, and to him it looked like it was just a universe of darkness, where light barely had any like real estate at all. But then he starts describing like how stars are made and how like matter is coalescing and everything else, and ultimately comes to the conclusion that yeah, there was once only dark, but the light is winning. That is to say, there's more light in the universe than there was in the past, and it's continually becoming more and more and more. So even though the darkness envelops almost everything, in the battle between light and darkness, according to Rust, the light is winning. And this line reminds me of that so much. I'm gonna, in fact, in the notes, I'm gonna put a link to that because it's really profound, I think.
No, and I don't think you're necessarily wrong in your interpretation of like what Dante's saying here. And that's why I say I don't.
Well, I don't think the light is winning in this instance.
Well, no, I think
the light
it is.
losing.
No, I think it is because the whole point is they're talking about the light as it's progressing through hell, as this person is transversing from hell through purgatory to heaven. So, like, I think even in this, it's the light is winning. It's just the light's not.
I think the light. I would say the light is, in my interpretation, the light is making a valiant effort, right? It's doing whatever the four cardinal virtues can do, right? But this is why it's such a tragedy that Virgil will never leave hell. Like, in the end, it can't go beyond that hemisphere, right? There's a point at which the darkness stops it from piercing through.
But if the light completely engulfs the hemisphere eventually, so let's just say, with the logical progression of eternity, since we're operating on that infinity number, the logical progression
divided
of
by
eternity,
0.
no,
Right.
because we're not talking about that part. But with the logical progression of eternity,
We need to do
light,
this math thing.
this light will eventually completely fill the hemisphere, and it will be everybody within that hell would eventually have the quote-unquote gentle hell. They would have all the cardinal virtues eventually in this eternity. They'll never get out of hell. But so like even this, like this is why I say even with this, even if it completely fills the hemisphere, that's still the light winning in my opinion. Like I get that you see that barrier as some kind of lack of winning to it, but to me, there's already light everywhere outside the hemisphere.
Well, this is why I think it's kind of important to me that it's whether or not you consider the hemisphere to be light or the darkness. That interpretation kind of has some significance to me at any rate.
Well,
but
yeah,
I just don't see, like within the context of what Dante's whole project is, like to say that the light is winning would be to say that the efforts of humans will somehow outweighs the justice of God. And I don't.
Because that's interpreting the light as the light of man.
The light is the light of man.
But
That's what it comes from. It's the wisdom of the philosophers in the castle.
yeah, I no, I understand that. What I'm trying to get at though is, by Dante's interpretation in this time period, that light still would be God given, like the ultimate source, first mover.
I mean, to the
We're still,
extent that God made man.
yeah,
then yeah.
yeah. This is my point. Like it's still the ultimate source of. So like this is why I didn't want to get too deep into it. I think that the translation is immaterial because at least in the Italian, in the way that we can understand it, it seems either Musa, Sayers, or Longfellow all have a appropriate translation, and it then becomes interpretation for us what it means. Like I said, without deeper 14th century Italian. Because there may be something there, like an accent mark that means something different in that time period that it doesn't mean the same in Italian now, so on and so forth, that we just don't have here.
I mean, there is something here that sort of supports your position, and that is the word vincia at the end, right? So when it says, "I saw a fire that overcame a hemisphere of darkness," that word "overcame" is vincia, which is etymologically linked to the word victory, right? So there is a kind of victory that's happening there. It's just that victory ends at the edge, right?
Well, because and this is where my interpretation comes in. This is not supported specifically by the text. This is supported by the dogma and theology of the religion at the time. Everywhere else already would have been light. Even purgatory and heaven all would have been light comparative to this area. This is the light conquering the last bastion of darkness in the interpretation of the theology. So the light's already won everywhere else. It doesn't need it now. It needs to win here, and the winning of that comes with the second coming of Christ, and therefore taking complete control of hell and so on and so forth.
Given a jailbreak.
Pretty much. Like really what it comes down to. Now, now the next part is Despia. We're going to end up losing him soon, so I'd like to be able him to get through his next two parts at least. It just means we may lose him for the last one, unfortunately.
And he to me,
No, sorry, I was going to say line 76. You already started to read, my bad.
and he to me the honorable name that sounds of them above there in thy life, wins grace in heaven that so advances them. In the meantime, a voice was heard by me. All honor be to the preeminent poet. His shade returns again that was departed. After the voice had ceased and quiet was, for mighty shades I saw approaching us. Semblance had they, nor sorrowful nor glad. To say to me began my gracious master. Him with the falchion in his hand behold, who comes before the three, even as their lord. That one is Homer, poet sovereign. He who comes next is Horace, the satirist, and third is Ovid, and the last is Lucan.
Actually,
Or
go.
Lucian?
Yeah, Lucan is correct. Actually, go one more. I actually clipped it wrong. It should have been one more line because it's the rest of what he's saying.
Because to each of these with me applies the name that solitary voice proclaimed, they do me honor, and in that do well.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I added the color last night at like fucking 2 a.m. That's my bad. As you can tell, the numbers are all in green. Originally, this was all written in green. The reason, this kind of reinforces what I was saying again, because it's talking about the victory of this area, the preeminent poet, shade party, etc. My issue with this area is this: the poet sovereign is the way it's described. Sovereign is a word that's used very rarely in this time period when speaking of somebody of non royal birth, and it's just It's an odd choice, and I wonder what you feel the significance of it is, Rich. Since you are the out of all the three of us, the Homeric scholar.
Mm. What was repeat that?
Because of the way they call Homer the poet sovereign, and in the
Hmm.
14th century, using sovereign carries a much more heavy significance even than we use it in today. That like what you felt the significance of this was like being the closest to the Homeric scholar out of the three of us.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I mean, very often we still look at Homer in this way as almost sort of the father of European literature. Um, and I think that he's especially mythologized in Dante's time because Homer is lost to him. So as far as Europe is concerned, we only ever have secondary sources for Homer. We don't get to read the original text, and I don't know if there's something about that mythologizes him even more in the eyes of like Europeans at the time, Western Europeans at the time. I'm not even sure if they're aware that it's possible to read Homer like in the Eastern Empire, um, because it is. But I think in the West they're not aware of this, or they don't appear to be. At
Or
least
or,
Dante doesn't appear to be.
or at least they don't believe the people who say this when they come back from their travels there, etc.
Yeah, yeah, it could be
Um,
too. Yeah.
um, the other thing I was going to ask about is the way that this is worded. It also reminds me of something from the Iliad, once translated to English.
Hmm.
Do you think that may have been intentional? Because, like, by the way, Longfellow's commentary on this particular section is dog shit. So anything we're going to add from this is going to be Sayers or Lusa.
Well, that one thing I wanted to say was the fact that like Homer may be in the Eastern Empire, but the thing to keep in mind is that like not even though people are not able to look at it like in a scholarly sense, Homer being as popular as he would be during that time period, the way word of mouth would travel with how stories would have been told about like different stories that the Homer
Oral
produced,
tradition, yeah.
and like yeah, pretty much where you'd have oral traditions coming from the what is it Eastern states to Italy, talking about Homer, but not necessarily being like directly from the text, could create a large mythos around him.
Yeah, it would probably radiate in intensity out from the Eastern Orthodoxy closer to the Eastern states. The more reliable and realistic it is, the further away you get, the more mythologized it gets.
Right.
Especially in this time period, because we're talking 975 miles over land and something like 400 nautical miles. So we're not talking a short fucking trip, like, no matter which way you go.
Right, but to imply that they probably didn't trade with each other, I don't think you could imply that though.
No. That was what I was. I'm saying I would put this in the outer ring, therefore more mythologized. Is the reason I was bringing
Yeah.
up the distance. Not trying to say they wouldn't do it. It would just be more mythologized due to the extremity.
Yep.
Something like this is happening still to this day. That's to say, like, we know that shortly after Dante, the West rediscovers Homer.
Uh huh.
And today, we're still rediscovering some old texts thanks to this library in Herculaneum, where there's a ton of scrolls that no one's been able to read before. And this new technology, thanks to the Mormons, allows us to scan these charred scrolls without having to unroll them. And AI is now helping us like being able to find out what the text says that's inside of those scrolls. And so we're finding a bunch of stuff. Like not too long ago, they found a lot of Sappho, undiscovered Sappho that was in there. And but there's of course the thing everyone wants to find are the lost dialogues of Aristotle because we don't have
Yeah,
those.
there's so many things that we would love to find in that fucking
Yeah,
Herculaneum.
so we're still reinterpreting the ancient world based on new discoveries of stuff that we thought was lost forever.
Mm-hmm.
So, and mainly because of that one library in Herculaneum. Yeah, I'll send you a link. There was a discovery just this year, just like last September,
No, no,
February.
I wasn't discounting it at all. I forgot that it was thanks to Brigham Young
Yeah.
University's document recovery lab specifically. But beyond that, like I have heard of this.
Look at that scroll.
Hold on 1 second. It's in the side chat, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
You could have mistaken that for a piece of charcoal.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie.
Well, it kind of is a piece of charcoal, right? Like once they scan it, they
Well,
could probably.
I mean, okay. Yes, you could, to the naked eye, believe that that's a piece of charcoal. But if you're going into an ancient museum or library and you are looking for scrolls, something that is vaguely tube-shaped, I think you're going to always be... Was it? Is it? Can we save it?
Imagine
Hey,
the act
Red,
of faith
I
that
don't
would
know
take.
if we have enough briquettes for these bratwursts we're putting on here. You go find something for me.
You give us something from like the alchemist who fucking tried to create gold out of cow dung or something.
I found this weird shaped looking one.
Like, how much faith would you have to take something like that 50 years ago, 100 years ago, whenever that particular scroll was found, and set it aside and preserve it, thinking that one day you'll be able to read it?
Not at all. Because
yeah, so like,
well, no, because you were putting a level of like faith in the way that I hate. By the way, the Hebrews 1:11 version of faith, the evidence of things not seen and things hoped for. This isn't that. This is, we know from experience dealing with ancient manuscripts that if a particular document is outside of our current technology, to preserve it as the best we can, because we have done that in the past and new technology has allowed us to save other papyruses and things in the past. And we have known this since the 1700s. So this isn't even a new thing we've been doing, because we've been saving ancient documents since before the United States was a thing.
Yeah, but I still think that that definition of magic, sort of applies here. Like, to think that we'd be able to read that scroll, the one in that picture, would require a level of technology that, to scholars 100 years ago, would seem like magic.
I don't know if it was colloquially maybe, but like it's different when we start talking about it like this, because like one of the things I'm talking about from the 1700s was applying acetic acid, essentially a concentrated vinegar, to loosen up certain portions of the papyrus to allow it to become flexible so that they could break it into panels. Because many times before, what would happen if they tried to cut it to make these panels, or if they tried to just fold it open, the whole thing would start to crumble. So adding a thin line of acetic acid essentially to create a perforation point at both ends, including the flap end that opens, that shouldn't be sealed to anything, they were able to separate out two pages at a time, and then separate those two panels out, and then layer it out. And this is in the 1700s. This is just boiling down vinegar.
Did you see the next picture down? Like
I
the
didn't
picture
click
of the
on.
scan?
I didn't click on the article. I actually just opened it in the side chat so I could see it.
There's a picture of the scan so that you can see the words. It's amazing.
Oh yeah.
There was a prize for this. You get if you could read 85% of the characters in a section of the scroll, you get $700,000.
Oh yeah, this isn't me going like doubting the scan.
This is amazing.
Stretch. Yeah, it is absolutely amazing. Like I said, I had just forgot where the tech had come from, because it was like it's one of
The
those
Mormons.
footnotes.
Yeah.
Well, specifically, I hate saying the Mormons, because it was multiple religious and secular.
But you know
scientists,
why
but
the Mormons
I
funded
do.
this research.
I
Yeah.
do.
So I mean, it's super interesting. But
No, and I'm with you on that. But I didn't want to derail, which is why I wasn't getting into that. I just wanted to bring up that it was the Brigham Young Restoration Lab
By the way, it was
That-
Philodemus who was discovered here.
Oh, cool. But it was the reason I wanted to bring that up is because they have also helped with document recovery of things like manuals and things and like journals and stuff from like sunken like naval vessels and stuff like this. So they do this constantly. It's not just with like ancient texts. They recover all kinds of damaged texts. Like this is something they are highly specialized in and have been for many years.
All right. So
Good.
there was one thing I wanted to bring up that deals like directly with like Dante and whatnot. There's the part where he says here like, "O thou who honorest every art and science, who may be these be, which such great honor have, that from the the fashion of the rest it parts them." And then at the very bottom here, he has like that one is Homer, poet sovereign, and then Horace, Ovid, and then Lucan. I think that he is like specifically calling out his muses for writing this.
Well, if that was true, I think Virgil would have been included rather than his god.
He is.
Yeah,
He calls
what do you
him
mean?
he calls him a muse in like the first or the
Yeah.
second canto.
No, but he's not calling these people his muses. That's what I mean. Like, so what?
I'm-
Like, are you
I'm
thinking
just-
this is just him extending the list?
Well, he's extending the list in this case here because the muses are those that are that bring inspiration to the arts and sciences, and he's like specifically talking about people that deal directly with the arts and sciences, and then he names them by name in a list.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. Like, I was just making sure I was understanding correctly because like these were like actual people, so it's like at least in Dante's interpretation outside of Virgil, like being that like to me Dante would have understood because of the time period that muses were considered abstract spirits. They were not physical entities. That was even a colloquialism in his day.
Then
I think,
why would he call? Then why
No,
would
no,
he call Virgil his muse?
No, I think that's a colloquialism. So like, if you're bringing it to that muse, that's why I was asking.
Yeah.
That's why I was asking if he's extending the list or if he's actually labeling these muses like they were abstract spirits made manifest. That's why I had to delineate and ask because it was like, hold on.
Right.
I think Musa agrees with you, Sensei, because
What's Musa say?
he says, okay, so Horace the satirist, this is a limited reference to work for Horace. Dante is thinking of the Roman poet's epistles as well as his satires. It's possible that his odes were unknown to Dante, or he may have wished to stress Horace's role as a satirist. But then Ovid is the third, and last comes Lucan. Okay, Ovid's major work is the Metamorphoses, which is like primarily like mythology. It's what he's the big source for Greek mythology at the time. And then Lucan provides Dante with mythological material as well, much historical information on the civil war between Pompey and Caesar, for instance. And so it seems as if Musa is pointing out that these authors are primary sources for Dante. And to that extent, they are essentially...
Yeah, no,
muses,
and
right?
that's why I asked for the clarification because with Dante, you have to ask because he can mean it either way.
Well, and in the way that Dante usually means, the answer is yes.
Yeah. and this is why I had to ask what you meant because,
So if you look at like let's look at Virgil, Homer. Actually, the order should be Homer, Virgil, and then Horace, and then Ovid, and these are all people who are doing what Dante seeks to do, which is they're essentially writing epic poetry, or they're writing like mythological stuff.
So I would say
he's creating his new myths himself.
Yeah, so at least for my colloquialism and for those in the audience who may want to like call a delineation in their mind so that they're not using the same word for two different like meanings, like these are the people that he idolized as opposed to were literal muses in the way that he means it another way. So, like, because, especially in this time period, you don't fucking talk about idolatry in any way. It's not good for your health in the 14th century to say that word in any kind of a positive fashion.
Well, and this is what links. This is what clinches it for me. It's 91. Musa's translation is maybe a little bit more clear. Since they all share one name with me, the name you heard resounding in that single voice, they honor me in so doing well. And that name is poet. They're all poets.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he's basically saying, you're a poet, I'm a poet, we're the same.
Yeah, all poets are by definition muses in the way that it's worded here. And I'm not even opposed to that in the colloquial sense, but like, because Dante means it in 2 different ways, sometimes 5 or 6 different ways later. It was worth wondering where Despi was coming from.
Yes. Yes is the correct answer.
Okay. Yeah, and the reason I know this is slightly pedantic to those who are watching. Unfortunately, I guarantee you, any professor who is getting into where he is going to get to this level of like specificity into like tercets and cantos, trust me, he is going to be just as bad. and you're gonna like need to like actually think about some of this stuff, because the way we use these phrases today is drastically different than the way we even used them 100 years ago, and insanely different than the way they would have been used in a different fucking language, this many hundreds of years ago. So, like, it's something to consider drastically, especially when you factor in Dante was a legacist. He was one of those people. He was trying to create a legacy. Like we know this from like his body of work. So like as Rich was pointing out, he was creating his mythology here. Despi, you look like you were about to say something. Sorry.
Yeah, and with that, I have to go.
Well,
Thanks
sleep
for coming
well. Sorry, we didn't get to keep you for longer, and we diverted so many times. But next week
They were fun diversions.
They were. Next week,
including the division.
Next week, if you don't mind, I want to start half hour early because we are definitely going to have a lot to talk about with Canto 5, like beyond a shadow of a doubt. We are just, and I would like you there because I'd like to try and get done with the reading while we have you, and maybe a half hour extra would be enough.
It could be. If you wanted to start an hour earlier, we can do that too.
Well, I don't want to like push it back too far because like it gets like problematic for you and stuff like that. I don't care so much, but I also know that
if you pushed it back an hour, it wouldn't bother me at all. Matter of fact, I'd be able to stay longer.
Okay. Maybe next week we'll start at 9 a.m. Eastern. Just because there is going to be a lot to talk about in Canto 5. Like, we diverted a lot onto tangents, but it was also like there was a lot to talk about in the lines that we've read this far, and next week is going to be even more so. So even without the diversions, I think we're going to need the extra time.
All right.
Anyways,
I will talk to you all later.
Sleep well, bud. Thanks for being here.
Take care. Bye bye.
Okay, so like, unfortunately, you lost Despi, and we get no Eucharist this week, but. As we continue to go forward, like, to me, Dante, when he goes into this doublespeak, this is very much his social commentary coming out to the educated. There's other times where he's just overly blatant about it, but when he does this, it's essentially trying to... The people who are already educated and know a lot of the same works of other authors that he does, he is essentially trying to get them to go back and reread it through a critical lens of his understanding in an attempt to create, I don't want to call it social evolution because I don't think that was his attempt, but social momentum, if that makes sense. Like I don't think he necessarily had an overall intent as to what that momentum would be. I think he was just trying to create it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but this is one thing that was sort of like drilled into my head when I was reading this, like for class, was that In fact, when I lived in Italy, there was this sort of this shocking like experience that we all had, and that is like the Italian myths were something that even the street sweepers like understood. So I don't think it was just the educated. I think because if you grew up and you had any kind of schooling at all, grade school type of education, to the extent that you read anything, you would have read Virgil, you would have read Horace, you would
Well,
have read
if they were literate,
the
yeah,
greats,
if they
and
were
you would have
literate.
yeah, but even the very minimal education that they had, like the little scraps of things that you would read with any kind of an education, it would have been these people. And also, there's an oral tradition for this too, even in the Middle Ages,
No, I'm not
where
disagreeing with that.
the number one thing that was read, of course, not read, but that was sort of discussed. Like, yeah, I mean, there was some reading too, right? Like, you started to see publications of the Bible and stuff like that. These sorts of things would get published as well. I, it, they would have known who Homer was. They would have known what some of these stories were. And there was something about the Divine Comedy that was sort of entertaining to the masses.
No,
So
that
I
I
think
get.
I think he's not just speaking to the
I don't
educated
think
here.
he is either. I think when he gets this um, abstract in it, where he is almost trying to show you a certain way to think, I think that's when he's speaking to the educated specifically, because they are the ones who have the power to make changes. I'm not saying that he's only speaking to them as in like the message is lost on everybody else. I think that is his intended audience when he goes this kind of like
Well, I
abstract.
am curious about the medium. Like, if you're reading Dante in his time, like in his lifetime. Well, we don't have the printing press yet, so exactly like what was the industry of like how did they make copies of books back then, and how widespread was it? How easy was it to get something?
Yeah, and this is
You would,
this.
I guess, you would have hired a scribe to make a copy of something, or you would have done it yourself,
There
or
was
you would have like
probably
borrowed something in a
actually
library.
no well actually we're talking about 1300s. This would be no. This would actually be there would be schools of scribes, and certain like works would essentially be like the equivalent of like master's thesis for somebody graduating from these scribal academies. So like the way you would graduate would be to be like perfectly copy like a great work. So at the very least, there would have been quote unquote, and because you and I both know there's really no such thing, but by their estimation, like the equivalent of like perfect copies, because at this time period there are certain scribal schools that go so far as to even like recreating ink stains and like mistakes in the artwork on the page and things like that. Like intentionally recreating the exact same mistake. So they were trying to
So it would have been a codex.
yeah, they would have attempted to, yes. Um, and I just heard a beep. Did you send something inside chat again? I'm not.
No,
Okay.
that was just
Well, yeah, I'm not keeping it open because I have the videos in the pop out window so that it's captured by OBS and doesn't grab the rest of Discord. Um, so like the reason I say this is because while the average even street sweeper knows the legends, they know the stories, the fanciful tales. It is the educated who have the understanding of the implications of where this thing affects like the levers of power and have access to those levers of power. So when he gets hyper abstract, the kind of things that could potentially be considered on the border of like heretical admiration for certain figures, I think that is when and therefore he goes much more like couched in the way he speaks certain things. Um, that is what he's trying to talk to essentially, and I'll use the term that we use today just for the quickness of it, of aristocracy, of his time period. That is who he was talking to when he goes there. When he is very blunt in his social commentary, when it is, you couldn't get this wrong if you were deaf, dumb, and blind, in his social commentary. That's when he's speaking to everyone, because he's like, this is what I believe. This is what I believe you should believe about this particular thing, etc. If that makes sense.
So
He-
I would. So I just sort of poked around, and it seems as if consensus is there were a few hundred copies of Virgil in existence
Okay.
around Europe at that time. So if you understood it, it would have been secondhand accounts, right? The people who read it, or even memorized parts of it. I
Or
would
it would have
imagine.
been scraps of like copies that somebody wrote down essentially as notes. Yeah. Even if they perfectly copied a couple of fucking lines or a couple of pages from it, it wouldn't have been the whole work. Yeah, that's fair. Um, Now, considering how quickly Dante ended up propagating, take a look at how many copies of Dante were 50 years after publication of Inferno. Well, I go into the next reading. Because I'll be fascinated to think if he surpassed his muse in 50 years. It'd just be
It would have been
interesting.
after his death. There wouldn't have been many copies of this, you know,
Or 50 years after his
available.
death. Fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, 50 years after his death, then, if you
But
want to go by
I
that metric.
bet this would have been one of the first works published once the printing press
Very, very quickly
was
so,
invented.
yes. Well, and like, remember, we're in the 1300s, progressing into the 1400s. This is as scribal colleges are growing.
This is another
number.
amazing thing, is that he would have written this with no expectations of it being widely read.
Yeah.
And yet it was such a detailed work that obviously required a tremendous amount of effort.
Oh, in his time period, even more than it would take today. Because I wrote something much longer than this, and I guarantee you, he put much more work into his, and it's not like I slouched on mine.
All right.
You know, like, he just imagine the amount of time it took to sit in fucking candlelit rooms trying.
He would have
to
had to have
read
been a
all this
genius,
shit.
honestly. I
Oh.
mean, no question
If
about
not
it.
a genius, just completely dedicated. Either one, like, because I'm very much one of those people. You can be a very gifted artist and quote unquote not be a genius by the way we define genius, but you would be what I would call like a genius of hard work, where your art elevates so much that even if you overall didn't understand the implication of your words still have extra meaning. You know what I mean? Like, there is that too. I don't know which one Dante is personally because, we only have so many works from him. But like, either way, like, beyond valuable to history. This week
So the first major publication was 1472.
Oh, many years later. I'm surprised.
Yeah, like a century and a half.
This we passed over even as firm ground. Through portals 7 I entered with these sages. We came. Make sure I'm not skipping something. No, I'm not. Okay. With these sages, we came into a meadow of fresh verdure. Verdure. People were there with solemn eyes and slow, of great authority in their countenance. They spake but seldom, and with gentle voices. Thus we withdrew ourselves upon one side into an opening luminous and lofty, so that they all of them were visible. There opposite upon the green enamel were pointed out to me the mighty spirits whom I have seen myself exalted. And I'll slightly go further since it's now just the two of us. Actually I'll stop there because it's the three name or the list of names next. Like, this is very obvious. Like, I don't think we need a whole lot of commentary here. I think that's why I stopped here, is because we then get into the part that needs commentary. Like, this is just the almost like expressing the grandeur of the scene. Sayer's translation very much agrees with this, by the way that she words it. Like, this is trying to like elicit a visual response from the reader. This is not so much like social commentary as visualization for storytelling. And to me, like, I personally like Sayers better, but since we're reading from Longfellow, that's the one I read from. Like the way that this is portrayed to me is almost as if they lack intent. Like if these souls that they're passing through were like I don't know how to describe this. Not catatonic, but uh, endlessly meandering and constantly mumbling. They say they spoke but seldom, but it's like, and their voice is sedate. But it's not like in the same way, because the way that this is described, it's like they're just kind of sitting there and there'd be a constant mumble, but it'd be just one at a time speaking, like almost in like waves, because of like just the sheer mass of them. Like, and then we then get into the names, which, in my opinion, this was the part when I said when we were talking in the group.
Wait, where do you see the mumbling?
It's they spoke but seldom and was with voice sedate. What I'm talking about is that it would sound like mumbling as you're walking through, because there'd be one person speaking and then another in this big mass of people. So to the observer,
I don't know. I mean, seldom implies that they almost never speak.
no, each one. But how many of them are there? So is each one, like, do you see what I'm saying? It would be a lot of noise over time because there's so many of them, and each one would like take a little while in between saying things, etc. But because there's so many, that would still be a small muttering of sedate voice at all times. Because the next lines is so we walk in Sayers. So here we walked aside a little and stood upon an open eminence. That eminence, that area, the lit serene, he's trying to disseminate the kind of like low level like hum of noise in the previous space to the serene lit clear sound area, clearly lit and clear of sound area in the next area. Like to me that's where that comes from. And like I said, I prefer Sayers, but we've been reading Longfellow. Like she seems to do it in the same way, whereas they spoke seldom, but in their voices sedate. Um, think about how many people that is, Rich. You've been at conventions when people are quietly like speaking every once in a while. It still adds up to a lot of noise when you have a lot of people in one space, even if it's happening here and there, because it's not like they're all gonna seldomly speak at the same time, and therefore it's a bunch of silence and then a very sedate wave of voices and then a bunch of silence that doesn't like fit with like randomness, you know what I mean, or like what we would understand of like even like the mundanity of like hell, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I kind of have the opposite interpretation. I get the sense that people. It says they seldom spoke. I don't get a sense that there's a large number of people here. Very few people are at least named or identified in terms, and I get the sense that the number of people who qualify to get into the Castle of Light is going to be quite small. So I get a sense of a very spacious area that is sparsely inhabited, and if someone has something to say, that's the only time they speak, right? So if it were constant mumbling in the background,
Why do you
that
get
would
this
give me
interpretation?
the opposite impression.
No, but because like what I'm talking about is like when you're in a large convention hall and everybody's trying to be quiet, mind you, like but there's hundreds of people in this convention hall. They are
I don't get a
whispering.
sense of hundreds of people.
How could you not when you start talking about the billions of people who have ever lived?
I don't think billions made it into the
I don't
Castle of
think
Light.
it would be billions, but you say you don't think it's hundreds. How do you think it's less than a
Yeah,
couple
because
hundred
I'm looking
out of
at
billions?
the text, and the text is giving me the
So
impression that
you're giving
it's
it more
quiet.
literalism. See, to me, it's
Well, I'm
quiet.
just
No, I think it.
textual. I'm just
No,
looking at the text.
no,
I mean, not necessarily literally, but at the literal level, yeah, I'm seeing a handful of people named.
well,
Um,
yeah, and that's what I meant. Not literally as in like literalism. I was meaning literary.
Yeah, I just get a sense that it's a very contemplative, considered, quiet room, which is why he emphasizes.
and
I think if
no,
he
no,
meant
I
to
agree
say
with you.
that there
Hold
was
on.
constant
This
mumbling in the background, he would have said it.
well,
That's my sense.
this is where I think we're disagreeing, because he is saying they spell but seldom and with gentle voices or in voices sedate, depending on which translation we're looking at. I am now looking at the reality of that many people, because it would be hundreds. Like, even if we're talking, this is a 0.01%. We're not even a tenth of a percent of people get into this area. Like, let's say it's not even that. Let's say it's 1,000th of a percent of people get into this area. Out of the billions of people who have ever lived, this is going to be hundreds
But
of people.
it wasn't. It
These
was. I
are
don't
the
even think
only.
it was billions at that point. But yeah.
By this point in time, there was already almost 1 billion people on the planet. So, like, when you start
A
talking
billion
all
people on the planet in 1370
total,
or whatever,
almost,
1350.
it was like 700 million at that time worldwide. Yeah, it was a lot.
Okay, so but the number. So keep in mind also, we're going through 7 gates. We're in a very large castle, right? Not everyone in that castle is in the room with him at that moment.
No, no, but what I'm trying to get at is these people are throughout the entire area of the seven gates, and then he gets to the raised area. That's why I'm trying to point this out, that distinction. And the reason I'm saying this is because you and I know the reality of that many people. It doesn't even matter. Like, I'm not saying hundreds of thousands. I'm even saying hundreds. You know what I mean? Not millions or billions, just hundreds. That many people in an area, even when they're trying to be quiet and they're speaking seldom with sedate voices, that creates a hum in the area. Like, I've noticed this in convention
Yeah, I just
halls.
don't see any evidence of that in the text.
No, no, I'm
I just don't see
basing
it
this
that
on
way.
the evidence of what we understand of, like, how groups work. Like,
Yeah, I just
they
don't think
wouldn't all
right, but
speak at once. What you're trying to describe is that they would only speak when they had something to say. There's hundreds of people. Almost everyone at some point is going to have something to say. And because of that, there is always going to be somebody, not all people, somebody saying something at some time. There would be that low level, very quiet hum. You wouldn't be able to distinguish what they're saying, but you'd hear what they're saying because of the level of number of people that are there.
Yeah, I just think you're um, interpolating that sort of practical consideration onto the text, and I don't think there's textual evidence that he's
Well, because of his
making that
next
point at all.
place, because the next point where he brings it out, he withdrew ourselves upon one side into an opening, luminous and lofty, so that all of them were visible. Like, he is then separating himself and then looking down on all of them. So all of them were visible. They weren't in separate rooms. They weren't in, like, separate areas. Even though he walked through gates, when he gets to this lofty area, all of them are visible. So that's why I am not so much interpolating as I'm just kind of like, when I visualize it, I can't visualize it any other way, because otherwise there would have to be some level of order to it, and in hell there is no order. Not
So
in that way.
when, like, for instance, when I go into a cathedral, like if it's a very solemn, somber occasion, there are a lot of people, hundreds, potentially thousands of people in there. And I've been in rooms like that that were totally silent because people seldom spoke, even though it was packed to the gills.
Was it silent
Right.
or quiet? Because there's a drastic difference. Because
Totally
I've been in
silent. Totally silent. You could hear a pin drop during these ceremonies.
that's
Every once in a while, the
wild
priest
to
would
me.
speak. It's not to say that
Because
no one
I've
was.
been in big cathedrals too, and that was not my experience. That's why I'm like, that's wild that you have had that experience. I'm not discounting it. It's just that's wild to me.
Yeah. You absolutely can have those moments. I just
Okay.
don't think, and I also think that I'm not sure how, like.
Well, no, this is our anecdotal experience coming into it, because my experience and that kind of same thing of everyone is trying to be sedate because they're not really supposed to be talking. I could still hear people talking. I still heard that little.
Well,
hum.
also it all depends on the acoustics of the space, right? But I think that
Yeah,
the impression
this.
that he's trying to give isn't like a cacophonous background. I think the impression that he's giving is a silent and contemplative
Well,
background.
I wasn't thinking. Yeah,
Regardless how realistic you may think that would be.
well, yeah,
in the real world.
No, I wasn't thinking cacophonous either. By the way, I wasn't thinking this was loud. Like I said, I was actually
I mean,
thinking
there are
of this.
cacophonous spaces in hell. We'll see
Yeah,
those in a minute.
yeah, and that's why I wasn't thinking that. I was thinking very much like you were, like sedate, like funerals, things like that, within cathedrals, like big cathedrals with hundreds of people. I could always hear the whispering. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could always hear the voices in the background, even though they weren't supposed to be talking. They were supposed to be quiet. I could always hear them talking because, like, that's just, in my experience, human nature. If they felt they had something to say, they'd say it regardless of the time. And therefore, when you get that number of people, the timing, because there is no order to it, ends up creating that kind of just low level hum. It's not loud. It's almost like the best way to describe it, because it's not this peaceful, but like the like babble of a brook. It's there, but it's not there. If that makes
Right.
sense, like you hear it,
But
but you don't hear it.
so if you have that babbling going on behind you, then you're going to have to speak louder than it in order to be heard, right?
Well, that's
But
why I
these,
specifically said a brook,
but
because you won't have to.
these souls are always speaking quietly. So whenever they speak, which is seldom, they can just essentially do a whisper and still be heard, right? So I don't think that there's this babbling in the background.
Well, no, it says
Um,
voice sedate, not whisper. It's not sedate is a, especially in this time period, but even in modern time period. But sedate is a indication of tonal quality, not volume.
uh, well, Musa translates it as quietly.
Oh, okay, that's why you're saying quietly. What's it say in the again? What's it say in the Italian?
It's
it
suave.
quiet? So silence.
Um,
I'm not sure. I'm asking because my Latin's
yeah, it
okay.
would.
My Italian sucks.
Yeah, it would. I mean, I think all of these translations are fair translations. Like, I don't have an objection
Look,
to them, but it would be. I think their voice. It's just that they don't have to speak up in order to be heard, right? Because they're in an environment where people are actively listening and where people seldom speak. So I think I don't know. I just take it
yeah,
literally when it says that it's quiet.
yeah, and for me, I still took it as quiet. I just took it more as a realistic version of that quiet. So like, interpretation in and of itself, or on our parts based on our anecdotal evidence, I think there, because like my experience is there, like that whole pin drop. I still like. I know the expression. I know the sound of a room like you're talking about. But in those rooms, I still heard people like whispering until something happened dramatic. Then it would go dead silent for a time, and then the whispers would start again in the background, just enough where you could hear it, just if you focused on it. But if you didn't focus on it, you'd miss it. If that makes sense. That's why I compared it to a brook, because like you barely hear those if you're not paying attention for the sound of water.
Yeah, I'm just sort of in the habit of whenever I interpret any text, I start at the literal level, and if there's something that there's no textual evidence for, but it makes like common sense to me that it would be there or whatever, I consider that common sense interpretation to sort of be secondary to the primary text, right? So like I might imagine that when I'm imagining the scene, like you might imagine that you're doing the math of someone seldom speaks. So if there's 10,000 people in the room,
I
seldom
didn't
might
know you
be
were a literalist
1% of
like
the people
this.
speaking at any given time, and therefore to your head that's hundreds of people speaking at the same time, which
Well,
creates noise, right? But to me that takes it sort of to the opposite of what the text is literally saying.
well, because first of all, I didn't take you that much as a literalist on this type of stuff, especially with our conversations.
I'm not a
told you.
literalist. I start at the literal level. That's all.
Well, yeah,
Every interpretation
I
is
stop. I,
even like for instance, when Jesus specifically says that what he's saying is a metaphor, you still first, like if you're talking about the parable of the sower, right, where he's throwing the seeds on the ground, the first thing you think of are the seeds and the ground and like all of those physical things. The metaphorical interpretation layers on top of that.
yeah, okay, and I understand that, but that is slightly going into the common sense interpretation that we're talking about. You're using common sense to do that. When he then says this is specifically a metaphor, you don't have to visualize the common sense interpretation at all. That is you choosing to interpret it that way and take it that way and then build from there. And that's why I say literalist. I'm not saying you're like fundamentally literalist. I didn't know that was your contextual start point. For me, when I read something, I try to read it as what the author is trying to make us envision. And almost, especially when you start talking authors who speak in such layered meaning within their writing, it is very literally, or very, very uncommon for them to be trying to give you the literal interpretation of the words as what they are trying to get you to visualize.
I mean, we can move past that. I think it's a relatively minor point.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I
It
think
was
it's
just
fair to
surprising.
say. I think it's fair to say that I think it's quiet in a room, and you don't.
Well, no, I still
Um,
think it's quiet. I just think there's that little hum, and then they step up and they look down on everybody, and they see the green enamel. They point about to the mighty spirits, who I myself have exalted. Like the way he is bringing this out is now these mighty spirits that he has exalted, seeing opposite him over this sea of people that he just walked through. Very quiet people, but the sea of people that he walked through. Like I just visioned it quiet, just on a more realistic level. You envisioned it on a literal silence level. I don't know which one of us is right
yeah,
to Dante.
very little of the Inferno is. I don't get a sense of realism in the Inferno typically.
Well, but I also don't
But
get a sense of silence in the Inferno. To me, the way that this is written, it's not a cacophony because we get into areas, as you point out later with that. But there's always noise. You never truly have peace. It's never. I mean, it's never truly orderly and peaceful and silent. Never.
you're
It's like.
familiar with music, right?
Mhm.
Like you've heard the term sotto voce.
I don't know what it means. I've heard the term said. I have no idea what the fuck
It
it
just
means.
it's just when something is like as quiet as it can be.
Um,
Like when you say something in sotto voce, you're saying it with a soft voice.
okay, what I was thinking more was just before the symphony gets started, that breath. You hear the breathing. You hear
The
the
cognate
sound.
for it is suave.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes more sense. Still, like I was saying, for me, the sound I'm hearing in my head in this scene is not loud. It's that pause just before the conductor starts moving his wand to the symphony, that breath of air where there's a little bit of movement, a little bit of talking in the audience, and then but it's so quiet you can't understand anything. And to me, that actually is more disquieting because unless you were to try and focus on a singular individual when they were speaking, you have no idea what's being said around you, and that would be very, at least to me, um, that would be very unnerving, and that's why I visioned it that way. Just to be honest with you. But if you want to go on to the names, I think this is where this can really get into what maybe Dante what was intending to it, and maybe that will help us.
Okay, yeah.
121
The names
through
that have already
129.
been read, you mean?
No, 121 through 129 is where we're at. It's I saw a lecture with
Oh, okay.
companions many.
Because we've had
No,
several names already. So
those ones were his, as Despy pointed out, his muses, his inspirations.
okay.
These are the
So we'll start
names of
with
now
Electra
people.
and
Yeah.
Daredevil. I
Well,
saw Electra with companions many, amongst whom I knew both Hector and Aeneas, Caesar in armor with falcon eyes.
careful.
I saw
Yeah.
Camilla Penthesilea on the other side, and saw the king Latimus, who with Lavinia his daughter sat. I saw that Brutus who drove Tarquin forth, Lucretia, Julia, Marcia, Cornelia, and saw alone apart the Saladin. When I had lifted up my brow a little, the master I beheld of those I know sat with his philosophic family.
Well, I was actually going to maybe stop at Saladin because
Okay.
that one was I think better translated to Dante's intention in Sayers, which is I saw great Saladin aloof alone. Um, like he is here, he is in this area, but he is separated from all of them. And like I always like when I read this, like this is significant to me on many levels because in the 14th century, Saladin was damn near mythological to many in Europe due to like what was going on. You know, like that is. I always wondered why here specifically, and why did he try not only to delineate him from everyone else, but um, to include him at all. Like it almost doesn't make sense to show him separated unless this is almost a slight on what he would have called Mohammedans. To or if this is trying to like bring them in the fold, and the intentionality is lost to me in the wording in English, and it may be not even clear in Italian, but like there has to be a reason for it because in a contemporary author, I forget the guy's name now, Saladin is also referred to as often aloof and alone in like the contextual speaking of the actual like historical figure. So like it makes me wonder if this is like an homage to that contemporary author, or if this is like a like societal like perception in Italy that Saladin was alone even amongst with his own people, you know, etc. Like he was that kind of like singular entity. Like I don't know what the intention is here. Thoughts?
Well, he's also part of a different intellectual tradition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of these are like Greeks and Romans, like the ancients. Here's somebody who lives, who's post Christ, right? But isn't a member of a religion who uh, recognizes him, acknowledges him, is aware of him in a way that the ancients aren't, and still is not a follower of Christ. So I think that puts him in a separate category from everybody else who's being written.
Well, but what I
Um,
mean is this meant as a slight against Mohammedans? Like he's trying to say this is like you're wrong, or is this him trying to bring them in and try and show like you know
well, I mean, if he's in the Castle of Light, he's being relatively honored, right? Because
yeah,
other people, I mean, he's in the best position you can be and still be in hell.
but he's
So,
also even in the Temple of Light, he's separated and alone from everyone, and that's
right,
why I mean like, well, what does this mean? Like that's why it made me confused as I read it what Dante intended here, and like depending on which commentary you read, either they ignore it completely, or they all have different interpretations, and so like I was not able to find a consensus. So like I wasn't able to help my confusion. It only made it worse. If that makes sense, and that's why I'm asking your overall thoughts. Is this a slight or is this actually an honor? Because yes, he's in the Temple of Light. Does that mean this is the best a Mohammedan could ever be? Because like many, you know, Islamic people today would very much disagree with this sentiment. Like so on and so forth. Like even in this time period, by the way. Like I'm not talking in 2024. I'm talking in 14th century Italy, the few that would have still existed in Sicily around Palermo, like they would have felt very differently about Saladin, because in this time period Saladin was considered a traitor in certain circles of Islam. So it's like it makes me wonder like what was Dante's intent, and that's why I'm kind of more curious now.
yeah, I just think he represents a different philosophical like line of thought, and so he's separated out for that reason. But I think the fact that he's in the Castle of Light at all is an honor.
Okay, so you don't look at any other wider implications it could potentially be. Okay, fair enough.
I mean, anything I try to add at that level would be just me
Well,
bringing
no,
my
that's what I'm
outside.
asking. well, that's what I'm asking. What do you think Dante meant? Because like, you've read this many more times than I have. Like I've read it, but like never at this layer of scope like that you have
I mean,
already done.
he obviously has respect for the Muslim intellectual tradition of his day. I mean, he gets his whole cosmology from Averroes, right? Who will be mentioned in a couple more
Yeah,
lines.
yeah.
So I know. I think he's just saying that he's not from the same tradition as the rest.
Okay, fair enough.
I think that's all he's saying. I mean, the Greek and Roman intellectual tradition is sort of clustered together here, and I think if he had more Muslims in this part of the castle, he would put him. Yeah, so he's aloof. He's alone. He's not participating in the tradition in the same way other people do. Saladin is probably the only person of the people on this list. He's the only person who in life was aware of Christ, right? So therefore, he would have been the only one to reject Christ.
Well, and Averroes, but yes.
So that puts well, Averroes isn't in this tercet. I'm talking about
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Brutus, Lucretia, Julia, Marcia, Cornelia, and then off by himself is Saladin. Now, in a couple tercets down, you'll get to some other Muslims, but or several down.
Yeah.
Like Avicenna and Averroes are both in 143 and 144. But yeah, Saladin is alone. Also, he's a conqueror, right? Like he's a political figure.
Yeah. No. Like I said, it was just because of the way he separates it. Like
These people who
your
are being grouped
interpretation
together
is
here.
far more charitable than mine was. Because to me, it was like I could only take it as either he was trying to give a wider.
These people who are being grouped together are all political leaders, if not conquerors. Yeah, like there's going to be they're all. These are all Romans, right? But Saladin obviously is not a Roman, so he's going to be by himself.
But I wasn't thinking of it like that. I was thinking of it, especially in this time period. These were all thought leaders. And like, so when he starts talking about Saladin aloof alone, like that's why like I wasn't discounting him as like thinking him great in intelligence and things like this or different than that. What I was trying to, the way he says this, I was wondering if the reason Saladin and certain other
the Saladin sacked the library at Jerusalem.
I forget if he sacked the library, but I know he got to Jerusalem. I'd have to refresh my history on that one specifically.
I want to say there's someone, if I'm not thinking of Saladin, it's somebody else who sort of famously picks up the Quran and says this book is the only good book, and then destroys the library.
Yeah. I don't remember if that was, like I said, I remember the story too. I don't remember if it was Solomon, so I don't want to speak one way or the other and be wrong.
I mean, he does conquer Jerusalem, which is,
Yeah. I just don't remember if he sacked the library.
It's very interesting to me that Saladin makes it into the Castle of Light at all. Actually,
to me, it wasn't that it was surprising that he makes it here. It was the aloof alone part, or just alone apart. The reason behind this is because Saladin himself was viewed as kind of like, even though he was a conqueror in this, in much of the Muslim world, and from what I can gather, much of what the Muslim population in Sicily and in Moorish Spain would have been like. They would have viewed Saladin not as a great leader, a hero of their time. He actually was viewed as a part alone because of how many times, well, yes, he conquered Jerusalem, how many times he would entreat with the infidel and things like this. So he had started to create a division within his own peoples based on his behavior. And I wasn't sure which one Dante was alluding to, because he would have known about both very intimately in this time period. Due to the closer proximity of it, he would have had even greater access to histories of this time period that we have since lost. You know what I mean? Like just due to the proximity of it. That matters, especially when you're talking. He's in Italy. It's not like he's having to wait for this shit to propagate up to UK or some shit. You know, he is less than 1,000 miles from Rome.
Well, it
What?
would be worth looking up. There's a good an interesting Reddit thread specifically about Saladin's appearance in the Inferno.
Really?
It's in r/ask historians. Here,
I'll
I'll
have,
send you a link.
yeah, I'll have to check that out later. I don't generally go on Reddit, not because like, oh, Reddit's a cesspool. It's just like I don't
No, I
have
like
time.
Reddit. You
No,
just
no,
have to filter it
yeah,
properly.
no. That's what I was saying. I wasn't trying to like say it's bad.
Honestly, I
It's
do
just
Reddit mostly for coffee stuff.
ah, for me, it's I go to Reddit when the link sends me there, and it's not a link I can find like scholarly article to. For me, I always like start at the scholarly and work my way back from there. So like I very rarely get to Reddit. It's not that I dislike Reddit. It's I don't know how to make sure I filter out all the bullshit on that platform. Whereas that's very easy to do when I start with Google Scholar. You know what I
So
mean?
here's just a comment from this historian that like posts through this thread. And this sort of like emphasizes why I don't take a realist view of the scenes that we're coming across. Here he says Saladin is more a literary figure and a rhetorical tool than a historical or realistic person. So like,
I mean, he agrees with Longfellow then, because that's pretty much what Longfellow says as well.
sure, yeah, the mythic Saladin continues to develop and grow in fascinating ways. New stories are invented and more emphasize Saladin's chivalric and almost Christian behavior. So there is a tradition, uh, at least among the Greek and Roman philosophers, that they anticipated Christian thought. Right, that's something that was a common thing to think in the Middle Ages, was that a lot of these ideas that ultimately end up, of course, as historians, we would say the inverse, right? Uh, we would say that the injection of Greek culture into Jerusalem at the time is what results in the Gospels,
Mm-hmm.
right? But here they look at it in a more Platonic, and that's more of an Aristotelian way to look at it. Platonic way to look at it is to say that the Gospels are the perfect like sort of philosophical viewpoint, and anybody saying something similar prior to Christianity is simply anticipating Christianity, is
Well,
starting to participate
my
in the idea
argument
of
with
these
that
Christian
is
ideas.
my argument with that is I would not actually call that Platonic. I would call that a apologist interpretation of Platonic theory onto it, because Christians try to
Well, there's a
label
reason
Plato.
Neoplatonism was a
They
big
call,
thing in the Middle Ages.
but it's also why Christians, especially today, label Plato a pre-Christian Christian. It is essentially, in my opinion, and many other scholars' opinions, um, the intent is to essentially bring on the credibility and expertise of Plato's argumentations to bolster their arguments as, oh, see, he saw it coming, this is proof of it, when they themselves are doing that post hoc or proctor hoc.
Yeah, I
Like
would argue that's also a very medieval way of looking
no, no,
at it.
I agree with you. I'm just saying, like, this is why on this, I think I fall more on the Aristotelian side, because, like, the truth is what the facts are on that, and, like, no, we can trace this back, and we can show the Mesopotamian, religions that fucking influence this. We can show the Sumerian religions that influence all of it. Like, it'd be very silly to now, with all of the evidence we have, to still take a Platonic interpretation, especially when we understand that I don't want to say theft of it, because I don't think that's accurate. Um, Assimilation of Platonic theory as a pre-Christian Christian theory um, creates, in my opinion, like, it creates that issue. Whereas with the evidence, you can't take that. You can't take that interpretation. Plato would not have been in any way aware of any of this, and it was only the post hoc rationalization that later created this connection between Plato and Christianity.
So the
He
most
is,
relevant aspect of this answer in Reddit is, by the time Dante is writing Saladin as a mythic figure, one responsible for treating captured crusaders generously and well, for meeting in honorable combat with valorous Christian knights, and for sending gold to the Templars for the support of the poor, sick pilgrims, and the crusaders.
I mean,
So he gets in there because of the Muslim. He's the good Muslim, right? That's what it comes down to.
Well,
And
that's what that historian thinks, and I mean, I get that, but some of those things he listed weren't myths. Some of those things were done. So, like, is that a mythological figure, or
no, no,
is that
no,
a
he's not.
historic?
No, no, no. He is. Some of those things were done, but th- those are the facts that make it into the mythology. Like, not all mythology is just
Yeah,
made up.
no, no,
Um,
no. I agree with that, but I'm saying, like, it almost sounds dismissive of. Oh, he only viewed him as a. But it sounds dismissive of Dante. That Dante was so unintelligent that he would have only viewed him as, despite having some access to some of the greatest fucking works of like history, at his fingertips in Florence, that he would have viewed him as only mythological. Like that just seems very dismissive of Dante's like understanding and education as well. Like it
I,
just that doesn't seem to track with it
I,
any more
I,
than the first guy.
I think it speaks to the way poets think. Like, I don't think it makes Dante dumb. I don't get the sense from the rest of his answer that he's disrespecting Dante in any way. I think he's just saying this is the cultural context in which Saladin was perceived at the time of publication for this poem. And what he's saying is, like, this is how an audience would receive Saladin. Well, like, why would you, if you're writing to a Christian audience, why would you include Saladin?
Okay, so
Well,
he's
it's
talking about to
because
the audience, not what necessarily Dante knew. Okay, fair. Okay, fair. I mean, maybe I was less
I don't think he's
charitable than
saying
this
that Dante
historian.
didn't understand the historical Saladin. I think he's just
Yeah, yeah.
saying that he understood how his audience would perceive Saladin being
Okay,
there.
no. Okay, and like I said, I didn't understand the historian was talking about the audience because the way it's worded is ambiguous.
But as to why he's alone, I think it's because he's the only Muslim in that list of people that are being presented there. Everybody else is a Roman.
Okay. I mean, I suppose it's one of those things like it makes me wonder because of how much we know about Dante and the way that he multi-layered, especially social commentary as well as religious commentary and political commentary, all into like sometimes singular words, sometimes singular sentences, etc. Like it makes me curious because this is a rare occurrence in the 1400s to show honor even to the quote unquote good Muslim. Like it's
Um,
rare. I'm not saying it never happens, but it's really rare. And every time somebody does it in this time period, it's fucking important, and it makes me wonder why this is so important to use here.
Another thing that's interesting here is earlier we're told like who resides in limbo,
Mm-hmm.
and it's implied that the people that are in limbo were not themselves sinners. And I think that maybe the way he's describing that there is different than the way contemporary Christianity looks at it, right? Because contemporary Christianity would say we all sin, right? With a couple of exceptions in the Old Testament. But uh, so these people in limbo, they do not deserve punishment nor reward, which is why they're in limbo. So I think it's kind of interesting that you would not consider, actually a lot of these names are people who we today would say, well, they must have sinned, right? Like they're humans.
Well,
Um,
some would, yes.
so certainly heresy is a sin, right? And this is one of the answers that on this Reddit page too, somebody said, well, Saladin would be the only heretic in this list. And the only reason you would call him a heretic is because he was born after Christ, right? So he's believing something that's heretical. Whereas everybody else was born prior to Christ, or was a pagan, right? Saladin's not a pagan. That's the best way to put it. Saladin's the only non-pagan in the group, right? So he doesn't have the excuse that everybody else has, which is they weren't part of the Christian tradition to begin with, right? But Muslims are people who have access to the Bible and reject it and put the Quran above it.
Well,
That would make him alone as well.
slight inaccuracy there, but they don't
I'm talking
reject
about
it.
from the point of view of a medieval Christian.
Yeah, and I'm still going to make the correction because it's not that they reject it; they just don't reject or they don't accept that it's the end of the Holy Scripture. Hence
Well,
why.
no, they reject it as well. The Muslims will tell you that while uh, while the Old
It
and New
literally
Testaments
talks
are,
about in the
hold on,
Quran accepting them.
no, what I'm saying is they consider these to be corrupted works. That while it's educational to read the Old and New Testaments, according to Muslims, they will tell you that they might be there might be some divine inspiration in them, but we don't have the originals. We have them. We have copies of copies of copies and translations and all this other stuff. Whereas with the Quran, we have word for word
I
exactly what Gabriel spoke. So that means everything else is corrupted, and therefore they're rejecting it
Yeah,
as a
I get what a lot of the modern ones say, and more what I was getting at is like the way.
they consider it apocryphal at best.
Yeah, and I don't
I mean, this is
care.
the ancient understanding
Yeah,
of the
and
like this is
I
what the
was
Muslims
trying
said
to
from the beginning.
correct the reality of it as you keep interjecting this fucking fiction that they fucking believe. This is my problem with that. Like, it was a fiction then, it's a fiction now. Like, they.
But I'm describing the fiction. I'm not trying to talk about the reality of the matter. I'm talking about what the understanding was. Like this is the context that people would be
I know,
reading this
Rich,
with.
I was correcting that because, like, when you just say the fiction, oh, we're talking about the fiction, and you don't, like, actually correct it, people don't know that that's just the fiction because it wasn't pointed out, it's just the fiction. Oh, this is what they believe. But it was wrong then because it was a manipulation of the facts then. It's a manipulation of the facts now to then just state it without actually stating the reality of it as well. Like that's kind of the point of why I was bringing in the small correction. I didn't think it would have to be this much of a tangent because I don't think you keep trying to push the fiction portion.
No, it's just, you asked why does Dante present Saladin as being alone, and so what I'm saying is this is the way his
That was the
moral
previous
identity
question.
within the text. This is the way his moral identity within the text separates himself out from the other names in that tercet.
Well, that was the previous thing, and then we were talking about what a bunch of the common people believed. Because then we were talking about what the people said on Reddit, not what Dante said or Saladin anymore. We were now talking about other portions of what was said on Reddit, and I was correcting that portion because that actually needs to be corrected. Because it's not that they reject it, they reject that it is the end of the line. Because, like, to them, Jesus himself is a prophet. He is just not the last prophet, so on and so forth. Like, a lot of this has to come into it when you're talking about this if you are going to be intellectually honest. You can't just state the fiction. Oh, well, this is what they believed. Well, here's the reality, too. You have to give
Well,
it.
yeah, but all I'm saying is this is why Dante would put him separate from everybody else.
Yeah, but what you're then doing is talking about the fiction that a bunch of other people would believe, as opposed to the again, this is parting away from what Dante would have potentially known and just assuming he believed the fiction when he had access to many great histories at some of the greatest schools in the entire country of Italy. Yeah, like we were talking about, like, he had some of the greatest teachers, some of the greatest access to scholarly works in his area. To just assume that is what it is, like, that just seems like very dismissive and reductive. And then to then preach that, oh, he believed the fiction. Well, dude, you're talking
No,
about.
I'm not saying what he believed. I'm just talking about the text.
And
I'm talking about the text, and I'm trying to interpret it in the most naive way possible, right?
and
Because that's
why naive? Why? That makes no sense.
because
Educated
that's
way.
the first layer of interpretation is a naive interpretation, which is you look at the literal level, right? What are they doing? They're standing in a room. Okay, how are they divided up? Well, everyone's standing here except for one person who's off on his own. Then you can interpret beyond that, but you start out with figuring out what is literally happening in the scene. At least that's always how I've done it. I've never done it another way.
I can't do that because there is no way to, in any way, create a cohesive and like like actually passable scene to the mind's eye. If you then look at micro points in a vacuum and extrude the absolutely obvious that would be there too, just because it is not overtly stated, that makes zero sense to me to start from that point. Quite literally, that is, in my opinion, like the worst way to start to interpreting a lot of these things, because of the simple fact by then you are completely fucking removing the author's intent, the author's fucking meaning. You're trying to break it down to the meanings of the words as we understand them today, as opposed to the way that they meant
No,
them.
not as we understand them today. Just as the meaning of the words as written. So yeah, if you can insert his intent into it, yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
we
That's a
have to.
layer of meaning that we want. But that doesn't mean I'm going to ignore the text. I'm going to look at the
Well,
text first because that's the first thing that
no, no, no.
presents itself to
It's
me,
not. That's not.
and
You
then
ignore it, but you. What I'm saying is you ignore the obvious that isn't overtly stated, that is stated between the lines. That also comes with layering a scene in poetic form. Just because it isn't overtly stated does not mean it is not there.
well, I didn't
Absence
say
of it.
no,
Well,
no, no. I did. That's not what at all. What I said. What I said is the first layer of interpretation is the literal, and then you layer other things on top of that. You heard me say that multiple. Hold on.
no,
Heard me say that multiple times, and now you're saying,
no, no,
"Oh, first layer of interpretation is literal," and then you ignore everything
no,
else.
no. I'm saying
Do you,
that
do you,
for
can
no.
you see how that's different?
No,
Can you steel man what I said?
I am what, and if you let me finish, I'm saying I don't believe that's the first layer. The first layer, you have to include the between the lines things as well that would obviously be there. Like if you are in a big room and it has four walls and a ceiling and floor, there's also space. There's dimension. There's other things that are not overtly stated here that are still there that you can't
So
ignore.
that's your steel man.
No, that's my steel man of what I was trying to say because I think you're thinking. I mean, it ends
That's your
there.
steel man of yourself.
No, no, no.
I'm saying,
Let
can
me
you steel
let
man
oh my,
me?
yes, and I'm about to. That's my steel man because I think you misinterpreted what I said of what I'm trying to point out. I think you need to start from there. The reason what you're saying is you start without that layer because you think that is a separate layer, whereas I think this is the same
Well, I don't think it's
literary.
separate. Yeah, no, I definitely don't think it's
No,
separate.
no, no, you think it's
What
a
I'm saying
separate
is,
layer because it then adds on to it, whereas I'm trying to point out, I think it is the same first layer, where it is not something that needs to be put on top of it after the words are taken literally. You have to take the words as they are put on the page, yes, but as they are intended with all of the extra meaning that would go on said. Like, if you're in a room with light, you'd be able to see the corners, you'd be able to see this. You wouldn't necessarily know the exact measurements, but there would be exact measurements. You don't remove that from the first layer and put that elsewhere. You keep that in the first layer.
yeah, no, I don't think that's steel man's what I'm saying. Because what I'm saying is, isn't that those things are separate. In fact, just the opposite. They all exist at the same time, right? But as the reader, upon a naive reading of the text, I am not aware of Dante's intent. That's kind of what I have to suss out. Once I understand the naive reading of what it is that I've read, right? So, well, hold on. So, if you can go to the text already knowing Dante's intent, either before or during a first reading, then you have an advantage that I don't, because
Well,
I
it's
don't
not that I
have
an
that
advantage.
knowledge of that intent.
It's not that I have a knowledge of the intent. I have the words in front of me. So, for example, here, we'll go back to 121 through 123. I saw a lector with companions many, amongst them who I knew both Hector and Aeneas, Caesar and armor, Gerfalcon eyes, with Gerfalcon eyes. This is a obviously there is a bunch fucking more people here. We don't know who they are. It's not just
Daredevil.
these four. It's no, but it's not just these four people that are named. There is intentionality here that is directly within the words. That just because they're not named, you aren't literally taking there. Like, and that's kind of my point. Like there is.
Well, but no, I can get there with the words.
But
The word
what,
companions many is there, so that tells me that there are more people than Electra, right?
Yes, but like when in the previous section when I talk about the fact that in reality without order Like with a group of people, that there would always be some layer of noise in a large group of people, even if they were trying to be quiet. You went literally, well, no, I read it as silence. I read it as complete quiet, except for
Right.
when they speak here. Like, I don't understand how you go literally to that when it doesn't say that literally. It doesn't say specifically that it's silent. It doesn't like, I am trying to interpret it in the way that he's trying to make us envision it, and like, he doesn't specifically say silence, yet you say literally it means this, and you took it as silence. I don't understand how you're getting that when even the words itself don't have that. So you're adding portions of your own interpretation as well. And what I'm saying is, we have to do that not at the first layer, because all of this in poetic form isn't starkly written out in technical language, where every little detail is laid out so that nothing is left to the imagination. Some of this has to be interpreted in the moment as you're reading it, not later. Like, you can't look
No,
at
no,
it.
that's unavoidable. I mean, that's a perfectly naive reading is impossible, right?
I don't think
But
it should ever
my
be the intent.
goal, yeah. Well, my goal is to start with a naive reading and then layer on top.
Okay,
So,
why is that better? Before we go on, why do you think that method is
because I want to
better
be
start with?
clear through the words what's happening, and I give priority to the text. Like, now look, I was trained in new criticism, right? So that means I prioritize the text and the like the cultural milieu in which the author came from, and the reader as equally important, right? Like, at least old new criticism does precisely that,
Yeah.
right? But you can never be perfect in the way that you balance all of these things. And the thing that I'm most confident in when I read something is the literal description of what's happening in front of me. And so that's what I'm going to start with. I start with the text. And
Okay. So it's a different personal perspective, because that's where your confidence lies, whereas my confidence lies in my historical knowledge of the time periods in question, and therefore, and more obviously, like if I'm looking at a room with a bunch of people, there's obviously going to be noise, there's going to be breathing, there's going to be like mumblings, like shufflings, etc. Like, so
yeah, there's
like,
a lot
I'm
of
not gonna hear
unrealistic things that
silence.
happen in this film. Yeah.
Yeah, so
It's
we're just looking at it from different perspectives because of where our confidence lies, and that's why I was asking, because, like, to me, the words are the least point we can be confident on, because we are reading translations. We're not reading it in the original language. So we are literally already layering in another person's interpretation, and then having to interpret that version of it. Like,
all translations are lies. Yeah, I understand.
well,
But
I would say all translations are art, is the way I've always viewed that, the proper way to view that, because it is a certain level of artistry that goes into it, because certain languages cannot in any way be transferred or translated one to one. There's many that can, but there's some that you just can never do. They just include words that don't
yeah,
exist.
and that's so that's why, like when I talk about a naive interpretation, right? When you have a naive interpretation, you're going to do things like see the word quietly and assume that means quietly, right? But you do so provisionally. That is to say, you're always open to the idea that, oh, there was something I missed, like there was some sort of nuance in that word that I missed, like the literal Italian word, which is voce suave, right, which is basically a suave voice, something like that, which does mean quiet, but it also means sweet. There's room for
Well, and
interpretation.
it means sedate. I looked up the word when you said it.
Yeah.
And that's what
Well,
I mean. So,
sedate is certainly the way Sayers translates it.
yeah,
Right?
and that's why I was like, all of them could be right, but I didn't view it as silence. I just viewed it as quiet.
But here's the
speech.
thing. I think what you're saying could be more accurately described as that this line does not blatantly contradict the idea that you might hear mumbling in the background, because it doesn't contradict it, but it also, to me, doesn't indicate it.
Well,
right?
no,
To me,
the reality of
if
that
it,
many people would indicate.
I know, I understand, but in the text, it seems to me that despite the fact that you might think this violates the laws of physics,
More
the impression that I got was that the room was pretty quiet.
Well, and I
because
still
they're
thought
able to
quiet.
speak quietly in it.
Well, and that's why I said I still thought quiet. I still thought very, very quiet. but that kind of quiet where if you were to like look at a person, you see their lips moving and focus, you might be able to pick out a word or two they're saying. It's not that kind. You see what I'm saying? That kind of quiet. Like it's not
Right.
perfect
So then,
silence.
let me ask, what like at what point is it important to to acknowledge that there would be mumbling in the background?
Well,
Like, is that important to
reason,
the text at all? Like, is he making a point?
to me, it is later because he points to perfect silence in purgatory, whereas like he doesn't do that, as far as to my knowledge and what I've read, any point in hell. In hell, there's always noise, not always loud noise, but always noise, and then a couple times in purgatory, there's silence.
Well, that would make sense for purgatory, certainly, because you're talking about like receiving.
And that's why this distinction matters to me, because I think he was trying to show from the very first entry into hell to the time he exits, there is never true silence. There's never true peace.
That could be.
That's why it's important to me, and I think that's maybe why I'm fighting a little bit tiltedly as opposed to academically on this, because like that is always how I've interpreted it. Like, as you approach the cacophony, the noise gets louder. As you recede away from the cacophony, it gets quieter. But it is always a small hum of noise in the background of hell that you can never escape.
So you would expect it to be loudest at the center of hell, if that were the case, right?
Well, loudest to the cacophony, not necessarily like a specific location within the topology, because sound waves also bounce off mountains, blocked by walls, all kinds of other shit. Like, it'd just be loudest closest to where the cacophony is originating. Yes. And the furthest point away, there would never be silence because there's never order in hell.
So there would be. So here's where I could compromise with you on this. I would say that this would presumably be the quietest part of hell.
Yes, I also
because it's a place of virtues, of the cardinal virtues.
And that's what I was agreeing with as well. I thought it was that quiet as a church, which isn't perfectly silent. It's just really, really fucking quiet.
Yeah, you can hear a fart in church apparently.
Yeah.
Someday.
Well, and that's just kind of how and maybe this is my anecdotal because of like my other interpretations of the underworld, things like this, and the way that it's been described by others who base their works on Dante as well. Like, they all seem to point to this as well. Like, it's never quiet in hell. There's never a peaceful moment anywhere in hell. Even in the Temple of Light, it's never truly ever peaceful.
And the first circle, we're not in the first circle yet, right?
No,
the castle's outside of it.
It's argued sometimes some people argue that the Castle of Light is the barrier of the first circle, so it would be in the first circle, but the barrier of. Some people argue Limbo, it's outside of it.
Limbo is inside the first circle, and in Limbo there are the sounds of sighs. Mm-hmm. So that wouldn't be particularly loud, but it would be some kind of noise.
Yeah.
But we're not there yet, right? We're still in the castle.
And and this is all I'm saying. Like, there's some people who argue over the topology of this, where it's exterior. Like, if you have the sphere of the first circle. This is essentially the castle, like Castle Black from Game of Thrones, sitting on the wall. And then there's others that view it as the barrier itself, where it's not a singular location, it's the whole perimeter is the Castle of Light. And that's why it's so large, is that it is technically encompassing the entire circle, because that's looking at it as a discus area as opposed to a sphere. Depends on the interpretation of how.
We should add this layer to the database. Like, when do you pass through various different states?
Absolutely. Before we publish it, we definitely have to do that. Maybe we can do it as like those will be the hyperlinks to like take you to certain parts, that kind of thing. Yeah, that
and show you maps and whatnot.
Yeah.
So we know that there's 7 gates in the noble castle, right? Also, we kind of need to. Are we going to call it the Castle of Light, or are we going to call it the Noble Castle? What is Dante
Castle of Light. I don't care what we call it. We know what we're talking about because it's been referred to. I mean, there's certain interpretations that call it the Temple of Light. Like, and I fall into that one because it is viewed kind of like a temple in the way that he words these things. So I can understand that interpretation too.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, like I
Okay.
don't know which one's right because, like I said, my Italian sucks. My ecclesiastical Latin's good, but I have the sneaky suspicion if I started reading Dante to my fucking Catholic priest when I was a kid, I may have gotten some looks. Just saying.
Yeah, I mean, my friends who are priests are mostly monks, and so they're very well read in Dante, of course. But
Well, yeah, but as a kid, they would have been like, "Why are you reading this crazy shit?" Because like
well, I don't
remember,
know. I'm surprised, like they don't teach it in every Catholic high school.
they taught it. They taught it in mine, but remember when I graduated high school, so I've still been a kid without even talking about this to my priest.
Yeah.
Um, it's like ninth grade was when I had it. That was actually
Oh,
English.
here's interesting. Musa calls it the Splendid Castle.
Splendid. You know what?
So it's the Nobile Castello. So it's literally the noble castle.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, nobile may not translate to noble. It's a
Castle.
cognate for
Well,
noble.
it could be castle of nobility. It could be castle of like the. There's a lot of things that it could connect to. Like.
So I'll say the noble castle for now.
Like I don't
That's
ever
just-
use my real name online, mainly because I fucking hate it. But my real name, if you translate it to its original root language, technically means nobly bright. But it doesn't mean noble as in nobility. It means noble as in like selfless in the original root language.
And so let's get a topological description. 7 times encompassed with lofty walls. So there's 7 walls that surround the castle.
Yeah.
And by lofty, it says dalte mura, which literally means tall walls or high walls. Sayers says high walls. Musa says high walls. Longfellow says lofty, but that makes sense. A loft is something that's high up, right?
Well, lofty walls with this description would be very similar to high walls in the contextual language of his time period. So I think he was more reading it as he would understand high walls as opposed to like a literal translation of the word. But that's just because that's what Longfellow tends to do. If there is a word that his particular time period uses more, he favors it.
Now, does it matter that the ground is hard? We're walking over hard ground, firm ground,
Yes,
as Longfellow puts it. I think Longfellow's more poetic description is firm ground. Interestingly, Sayers says dry ground.
I don't know why Sayers says dry ground, because when I looked at the Italian spreadsheet, I don't see dry there.
Well,
I saw a hard, durable, hard.
Yeah. So, well, I think
to
it's
me,
to contrast it.
Well,
I think there's a reason for it. I think it's to contrast it with like marshy ground that might be hard to trudge through. Right?
Yeah,
This one you can easily walk on.
But what I was going to say is what I understand the translation to be trying to imply is ground that no seed will grow in, like that kind of hard pack. If that makes
So,
sense.
is there a significance to the topography of the castle? So, in the castle, it's apparently circular, although he doesn't say circular, but there are 7 walls that surround the castle, and you go through a gate for each one. So there's 7 gates. Is there a differentiation? Would you say, for instance, I don't know if this adds up to 7, but my guess is that these groupings that he makes are going to be 7 groupings, right? So
I believe it lines up that way. Yes.
So then we start with the noble school, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to call that the noble school. The noble school is...
Well, we can get to that later, because we're almost done with the reading. Let's finish up the reading.
Okay.
Before
this
we
is
get into
stuff we've already read, but okay.
yeah, no. Before we get into like making the next electronic document for this stuff, because we're almost done. We got 21 lines left. Actually, wait, less than that because you went 1 into the red, so we have God damn it, 18 lines left. Excuse me. As the weather shifts in my state, I have 2 trees that like to drop a crap ton of pollen, and both of them like to kick the crap out of my sinuses. Um, the reason I viewed this as like hard pat ground is because, like, again, this is supposed to be like maybe the quietest part of hell, but it's also the deepest part of hell. So like this would be like the this would also like show a transition of or not the deepest, the highest part of hell. This would also show like a transition of like the infertile nature around hell, which is described in the borders in certain scriptures. To like everything around hell dies. This would be like trying to show that the ground itself couldn't support life. Is the way I read it. But that is bringing in scriptural analysis into the Dante reading itself. So like, I could be wrong.
So it's also interesting to me that some of these characters that we've already met are prior to the city, so they're not inside of the city. Maybe they reside in the city and they're just like on a walk. I don't know.
The way I viewed
But why do we
is,
see them before we see the city?
the way I viewed it is we are technically, quote unquote, in the city. We are not to the noble castle, so this would be the equivalent of like the hamlet around the keep. Is the way it's the way I envisioned it. I could be totally.
So they're
wrong.
on castle ground.
Yeah.
They're just not inside at the moment.
Yeah, that's the way I envisioned it. I could be totally wrong, but like as I'm like picturing myself as Dante walking along with Virgil, that's how I envisioned it.
You took from us the shade of the first parent. Okay, yeah. So these are characters who are not currently present. Oh, that explains it. Yeah, that's right. These are people who left hell. So Abel and Moses and Abraham and David and Israel and Rachel.
Well, and Seth. Well, he doesn't say the name specifically, but he alludes to Seth as well. Yeah.
Rachel is now Beatrice's roommate.
I don't know.
Neighbor.
If neighbor would be like the accurate.
Sweet mate.
Well, it depends on how you interpret the actual like quote unquote like mansions in heaven and stuff like that.
Right.
Are they separate grounds? Are they like essentially one giant fucking multiplex? Like I don't fucking know. Like I don't even want to like guess at that. I will just say neighbor because like that has the communal aspect to it. That it doesn't matter if it's a apartment or a house. You're still a neighbor.
I'm gonna say sweet mate, just because it's kind of in between roommate and neighbor.
Yeah. Yeah, I could get with that. But okay, so my camera whore kitty decided that she wants to be a butthead again, like she did at the beginning of the stream. Get down, baby. Okay, so all gaze upon him and all do him honor. There I beheld both Socrates and Plato, who nearer him before the others stand. Democritus, who puts the world on chance, Diogenes, God, that fucking name. Anaxagoras and Thales.
Wait, Starfleet battle?
Huh?
Axanar.
Oh, no, there's a G instead of the R there.
Get it? The battle with Klingons?
Yeah. No, you made me smile. I'm just like, yeah, close, but not quite. This must be the Klingon dialect version of it.
Right.
Thales, Zeno, Ampendolocus, and Heraclitus. And I'll keep going through blue since Despy isn't here. Of qualities I saw the good collector, high Dioscorones, and Orpheus saw I, Tully and Livy and moral Seneca, Euclid, geometrician, and Ptolemy, Galen, Hippocrates, and Avicenna, Averroes, who the great comment made. And the reason I stop here is because we get to Averroes, where we get all of his cosmology. Now, I am not horribly familiar with Empedocles. Yes, I'm not with his writings. I know the name, I see him referenced. I'm not as familiar with the writings. Everyone else in that tercet, I know. Obviously, Socrates and Plato. You and I go fucking over with that, and Aristotle constantly. So obviously, I know them. Um, Democritus, Diogenes, I know. But Anaxagoras and Empedocles, I don't know their works very well. Do you?
Empedocles, you're familiar with, you just don't know it. Like, but you know, like air, water, earth, and fire,
Yeah, but I don't
and then you
remember
have
the
to balance those things, and that's
So
it.
he's the one. He's the one who came up with that. Okay. Well, I just haven't read his work specifically because I'd remember the
Mhm.
name if I read the work he wrote.
Right.
And I've never read specifically what he wrote. Same with Anaxagoras. I've seen the name before. I may know what they came up with, but I never read what they wrote. Do you know that one by chance?
I'm sorry. Say again.
Anaxagoras.
No,
I've
spell that one. Oh,
Anaxagoros.
Anaxagoras.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard the name, but the guy to read for all of this is there's a guy who wrote something called the History of Philosophy, and it's a 9-volume series, and his first volume is like incredible because it starts with the pre-Socratics, and that's who you, and then he like moves on forward from there.
Well, I
He's
would
a pre-Socratic.
well, I would like to do my best because, like, with Socrates, with Plato,
Yeah.
Aristotle, etc., I read their works directly. I would like to try when I read somebody. Granted, sometimes I fail and I end up having to look like somebody else up to help me understand it. But I try to read their original work, or at least a translation of their original work first before I go on to the other shit. But obviously, ancillary thinkers end up using them, and sometimes I end up learning them without knowing that I'm learning them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The pre the pre-Socratics are kind of uh, like there's I don't know how much Carl Sagan you read, but
I have.
Sagan. Oh man, you're doing a lot of clicking.
Oh, sorry, because my cat's on my lap, my mic's close to my mouse.
So yeah. So anyway, all of these pre-Socratics are kind of interested in physics, and like Sagan is of the belief that that Socrates slash Plato, depending on which one you think was the real mind behind all that, sort of move us away from that and start talking about more abstract ideas. And he says that that sort of moves Greek philosophy away from physics. And so that if it hadn't been for Plato, we might have had a lot more scientific advancement historically from the ancient world. But Sagan thinks that that Plato sort of created a lot of distractions in the world of philosophy.
How do you think I came to my conclusion that because of the way that he's been adopted by the Christians, that he became essentially retroactive apologist for them? That's a Sagan take.
Yeah, yeah. So, but I'm just saying it's not just Christianity, right? He says that even in the ancient world, we're moving away from the materialism and we're moving towards all of this, like, sort of world of
Abstraction.
abstract ideas. And certainly that makes its way into Christianity as well, but it happens long before Christianity.
No,
And
I agree. I
he
was just agreeing when,
promotes
when
that.
you asked if I.
So he doesn't blame Christianity. He blames Plato.
No,
He's not a fan.
I agree. I was just the reason I said that is because you asked. I don't know how much Sagan you've read, and I was just kind of bringing up. I've read a lot of Sagan.
Yeah, yeah.
Sagan is one of my heroes because you were talking about a man who was able to say all of the things in a lot of respects that I believe.
Yeah,
In
this
a
is mostly
way,
demon haunted world I'm talking about.
far more articulate than I ever could. And I don't want to parrot him because that, like, everyone's like, oh, imitation is the greatest form of flattery. To me, that's not. That's like, I could never do it as well as him. I would always be a pale imitation at best because, like, that man just had a presence. Did you ever meet him?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
I got to meet him for like the handshake thing at like one of those
Yeah, sure.
convention things. So like I didn't know him, but like I got to meet him. Like he just had this presence about him, and this could be a little bit of hero worship because he was already a hero of mine when I was like going to this convention thing. But like it seemed like everybody who met him, like as they walked away looking at their hand after he shook their hand. Like it was that kind of like just everybody was just in awe who met him that I saw. It was just wild. Like I can't pull that off. I'm a prick. Like there's no way I could pull that off. Like even as like an act, I don't think I could pull off singing. Like honestly, there's something like special about that man. And so yeah, like that's the reason I brought it up is because like yeah, Sagan is the one who kind of shapes my view on Plato when it comes to like how he is misapplied, and specifically misapplied because I do not. This is where I diverge from Sagan. I don't blame Plato. I blame the people who misapplied Plato. Because if you actually look at Platonic thought compared to a Platonic thought is later adapted after Plato is long since gone, they aren't one and the same, and you end up getting like a heavy divergence. I blame the people who created that divergence because Platonic thought, the idea of abstraction having value, to me, like there's no negative to this. Like abstraction is what gets us theoretical physics, theoretical mathematics, so on and so forth. That all comes from that layer of like abstraction. Maybe not Platonic, perfect, solids, but definitely that layer of like Platonic abstraction. So it's like to say that this is a negative on science, I believe, is a misunderstanding. It is the people who misapplied it, much like anybody who misapplies any tool, causes it to look worse than it actually is. Because how many times is you and I both had this argument? It's not the tool that the person's using; it's how they're using it that's causing the problem.
By the way, the Brutus in this is the other Brutus.
Brutus Maximilian or whatever it was, the non-etu brute.
The one who overthrows Tarquin.
Yeah. Yeah, I forget his other name, but
a lot of people are confused when they hear see Brutus here because they're like, "Wait a minute, isn't
because
he at the bottom level?"
Well, yeah, because they just saw Caesar. Yeah.
Everybody knows where the Brutus is.
Mm-hmm.
Lucius Junius Brutus, 6th century.
I read a parody of Dante's Inferno before, where they changed out who was where, and they changed out a couple of like names. I'll have to see if I can find it again, but a couple of the apostles ended up in a couple of the circles.
Right. Sure.
Interesting. But back to this. It's where I left off was at Averroes, the great comment. We'll finish up talking about these last people. Euclid, Ptolemy, Galen, Hippocrates, Avicenna, and Averroes. We are talking about. These are the scientists that in the 14th century have quite literally shaped the world. As a vast majority of people know like any of these subjects. Like the Ptolemaic model is still used in agriculture, ship navigation, etc. Euclid, fucking obvious where all that's used in construction and whatnot. Galen for medicine, Hippocrates for medicine, Avicenna for his fucking contributions to oh god, I forget what it is now. I won't say wrong because I don't want to be wrong on that. And Averroes for his cosmogony. This is.
It will be very important for the Paradiso.
Yes, it's also true. These names are, in my opinion, Dante trying to show, specifically in this tercet, where the boundaries of his scientific world are. If that makes sense. In the previous, he showed where the boundary, or in the previous two, he showed where the boundary for him of theology and philosophy were. Now he's showing the boundaries of his scientific. Would you agree?
Yeah, Yeah, this is the way. I think these are going to end up being 7 groupings, right, for the 7 walls and 7 gates.
And you may be right on
Um,
that. I was just saying with this grouping, you see each one. He's been showing like extremities of a certain bubble of each subject.
yeah, sure.
Yeah, at least that's how I've read it, dude. And I was just seeing if you see it the same or if you're seeing a different
Yeah, and
like
here's
perspective.
Musa. This is what I like about Musa is Musa talks about this stuff, whereas I think Sayers just wants to assume we already know it. But Musa will tell us Democritus. So yeah, these are all physicists basically, right?
Uh huh.
So
Well, of
Democritus,
their time, yeah.
yeah, he said that the world was chance, a Greek philosopher born in Thrace who formulated the theory that the universe was created from random grouping of atoms.
Uh huh.
And also that's where we get the concept of atoms from. A lot of people attribute it to uh, Lucretius, but he gets it from Democritus. Uh, then you've got Diogenes, who also talks about the physical world. I mean, all of these people are talking about the physical makeup of the world. So
Yeah.
for they are what Aristotle would call in the physics would call physicists. Um, yeah. Yeah, so that is certainly a grouping. I suppose there must be a classical like way to divide these things, but for now I'm going to call these the physicists.
Yeah, the next was the philosophers. The next were
Hmm.
the hard sciences, so to speak. Because philosophy or physics at this time still included a bit of magic.
Yeah, so right. I think like Brutus and Lucretia and Julian, Marcia and Cornelia and Saladin, as we said, are all political, right? So
Political
so
thought
you
leaders, yeah.
politicians or conquerors
How
or
about
whatever. Like
statesmen? Because that's accurate to all of them.
except is there another grouping of statesmen? Like, do they have like I don't know
Well,
Cicero and
not for this area, no.
okay,
Like
because
at
these
least
all
for
appear
this
to be
canto, we can call them the statesmen.
okay. I'm gonna say that for now, but
And
I think
we'll use it as a placeholder till we come up with something better.
yeah, because I think maybe they could all be tyrant. I don't know,
Yeah,
not tyrants, but
like I said,
um,
we'll use it as a placeholder till we come up with something better here for it.
revolutionaries. Right. But we did skip over Socrates and Plato. He's in that's
Well,
134.
I didn't skip over them. They stand on to themselves. Like
Yeah, but
when
I'm just saying they're prior to that list of physicists.
would you call them physicists? Because I would call them part of the philosophical family that he describes in the previous terce.
Um, so you would group the pre-Socratics that he's listing with Socrates and Plato, like in the same family,
Well, as
like within the
philosophers.
same walls.
Yeah, well, as not in the same walls because he says they stand apart. It's uh, that they're philosophers. That now these may be the highest of the high philosophers, and then these are the barriers of his philosophy. If that's why I said when he gets into the groupings of multiple names, it seems to be God damn it, cat, get down. He seems to be setting his perimeter. So like to give you the visual, like when he's doing this, it's he's got Galen, he's got Hippocrates, like he's setting a perimeter of this is his world that he is setting this in. These are the people that epitomize like the best of the extremities of this world, and that for the philosophers with Discordius and Orpheus and whatnot. And then Socrates and Plato are the ones above them that all the rest basically are not subservient to but subordinate to in the order condescendi, if that makes sense.
So I'm looking for. We're in Canto
Four.
4. So I'm looking for. I'm seeing a discrepancy in this translation. I think something might have gotten
What do you mean?
misplaced. So if you look at 135
Uh huh.
in Sayers, it has Diogenes, Thales, and Zeno, and I don't think that belongs there. So hold on.
No, she moves stuff around. If you look at hers come in a different order, but roughly the same groupings. Um, this is why I held Socrates and Plato to be within these groupings, just above them.
Yeah, but I'm trying to figure out.
Oh,
if-
you're looking
if
at
I
the
just-
Italian. Yeah, okay, fair.
135.
It'd be 130 to 138 is the
To
section.
him,
you need to look at.
Diogenes, Thales, and Zeno. Okay, so where are Diogenes, Thales, and Zeno then, if not in 135?
That's what I'm saying. Look at the Italian, and
Oh, it's in 137. Okay, I see.
yeah, the section that you need to look at as a grouping is the three tercets 130 through 138. That will give you the very specific area in the Italian to see.
So she
who's
just sort of
like-
reorders some of the names.
I don't, because it seems like she reorders it for ease of speak to fit within her rhyme scheme, but she still groups them in the same way, if that makes sense. Like, because she's seen.
Well, I think she does reorder them because, like, for instance, if you look at 137, it's Diogenes, Thales, and Anaxagoras, but for Sayers, it's Empedocles and Anaxagoras. And then the next line is Heraclitus. So she's
Well, no,
just,
she's reordering it, but what I mean though is, I think she's reordering it for rhyme, but she's still
Yeah.
keeping them grouped in the same, quatrain bubbles of four names.
right.
Yeah, that's all I was getting at. I think she's just doing that for her rhyme scheme.
Okay. The master sage of those who know, by principle of elimination, must be Aristotle, right? Because she doesn't say Aristotle's name aloud. By the way,
I would agree. By the way,
Dante. This seems to be an honorific. If Dante does not say your name, it's probably because your name is too rarefied for the Inferno.
well,
right?
as Sayers says, all do him honor and deep reverence show. All, she's trying to point out the very same thing you're talking about.
Right, but I'm saying, like, for instance, Jesus, or I think Christ. Yeah, Christ is never mentioned. Jesus is never mentioned.
Nope.
God is never mentioned. I think Mary is never mentioned.
Nope.
By name in the Inferno. Now, once they get out of the Inferno, you'll see those names.
Seth is not mentioned.
Yeah, and
He-
so
he
Aristotle,
specific-
interestingly, is not mentioned. I wonder
Yeah.
if he's ever mentioned.
That
Maybe
I don't know for sure.
He's
but
given. That's quite an honor to put Aristotle up there.
I agree, but it is our interpretation that it is Aristotle. It could have been somebody
Right.
else. I personally agree with you that it's Aristotle because I think like the rest of the work that indicates that
Otherwise, Aristotle's missing entirely.
completely, which would be
Yeah.
even a
Weird.
greater.
That would be weird.
Well, I don't think it would be weird. I think it would be a greater commentary of why. Like, why is he? Is that because he's going to be honorifically mentioned in heaven?
Well, it's not just that. Like Musa says that Master Sage is a title that they referred to Aristotle as in the Middle Ages commonly. So it would be sort of like saying the Duke. Everyone knows who you mean when you say the Duke, right? Like if you're talking about Westerns.
And many who followed Aristotle, this is something where I'm going to point to a discrepancy for Musa. Well, he's right. That is a name that was used for Aristotle. It was also used for many other great thinkers after him as like an homage to him. So it could be in reference to somebody else. I don't think it is, but it could be. I just want to admit that possibility.
Yeah, except the fact that a lot of these other candidates are mentioned by name elsewhere, whereas Aristotle apparently is not. So anyway, that's him. And also,
Actually,
Sayers says it's Aristotle as well. So just so
Hold
you
on,
know.
let me open up.
Master Sage of those who know. That's not a bad nickname to have historically. The Master Sage. Whoa.
Sorry.
Also, I can't help but see the Bat family in my head when it says sitting with his philosophic family.
Yeah.
Like, who are the members of the Aristotle family?
Okay, so far I'm looking through.
Socrates and Plato are, hold on. Now listen to this. This is, cinches it. Socrates and Plato, each closer to his side than any other.
No, okay, so I just did a keyword search on Sayers. At least according to Sayers' translation, Aristotle is never named. Now, I
Right.
will have to talk with in the entirety of the comedy.
But did you hear what I said?
Yes, I did. I agree.
So-
No, because I agree with you that it's Aristotle. I just will admit that it could possibly be somebody else. The only thing I will say is
It would have to be somebody else who is closer to Socrates and Plato than any other.
And I don't think there is anybody, but I'd have to
Right.
talk to Ancom, who could look at the Italian to make sure that first of all translates correctly. Second of all,
Wait,
that Aristotle
What
never
translates?
appears.
Master Sage?
No, closer than any other.
Well, hold on. You know who else it could be? You're familiar with Seinfeld, right? The Maestro?
Okay. Well, more. I'm
Or
not
the Hulk.
Seinfeld.
Could be the Hulk.
No, more what I was talking about is if it doesn't specifically say closer than any other in the Italian, it may say something else, like elevated above any other or something like that. I'd have to ask him about the Italian. And
What's
the
no? The
other
word is
thing,
Maestro.
the other
That
thing,
is the literal Italian word. Is
no,
Maestro.
the part about you're talking about the master sage portion, maestro. Yes,
Right.
that part I agree with. I'm talking about the portion of the sentence held above, closer than any other. That part I'd have to ask Income about because he knows the Italian. And the other thing is I'd have to ask Income if in the Italian Aristotle's name appears anywhere, because apparently in the English and Sayers version, or Longfellow and Sayers version, it doesn't. It doesn't appear anywhere in the entirety of the comedy.
Seems
Based
like
on
that'd
these
be an easy thing to ask ChatGPT.
except for I'd want somebody who to actually physically look over the Italian, who knows Italian. But yes, I agree. It'd be something to at least trust cursory
Ever mentioned
by name.
by
Yeah.
name. By the way, I was. You probably already knew that you could do this, but like I wanted an answer to something, and it said that this thing didn't exist, and I said yes, it does, and I gave a Wikipedia link, and then it absorbed the Wikipedia article, and then it gave me a new answer, assuming the information in the Wikipedia article. So like
I haven't done
it
that,
found
but
it.
I knew it had the ability.
Yeah.
Because like when GGB4 came out, like I read like the patches. I just like you remember mostly after I stress tested the shit out of 3 and 3.5. I used it as a copy editor. I haven't used it for much else since. Like I put my stream of consciousness like shitty punctuation, shitty capitalization, typing, and talk to text writing into it, and it wrote it into like proper paragraphs for me.
Okay, interesting. Ha ha ha! I just corrected ChatGPT because he said yes, Aristotle is mentioned by name, including in Limbo, and I said no, he's not by name. And then they were like, "Oh yeah, you're right. Like you are correct. It refers
Yeah.
to him without naming him, the master of those who know." So yeah, ChatGPT just learned something from my question.
Yeah, and that's my thing is like, it could have been one of the others. I think it's Aristotle because like, who else is he gonna put in there? Really, like who else would
Yeah.
Dante elevate above Aristotle unless, and this is a big unless, one of the other unnamed honorifics in Paradiso is referring to him, which
Okay,
would be an
he
even
is
bigger
mentioned
thing
in Purgatorio
by name.
by name.
Okay, well, apparently Sayers didn't.
He doesn't
translate
live
it
in
by name.
Purgatory, but he is mentioned like he's like referred to.
Yeah, like I said,
Uh,
but apparently, according to Sayers' translation, she doesn't use his name in that section because I just, like I said, a keyword search
Right.
Aristotle and it appeared nowhere. Well, besides in her commentaries, I should say.
Well, I suppose that makes sense. Like Aristotle's name is in, because I can read what it says. It says the Blessed Church militant holds 2,000 years or more on every side, spread out the living seal that reads his text. more explicitly in your mind may hear in Aristotle's Ethics search and know how he so it's not they're not referring to Aristotle, they're referring to Aristotle's Ethics. They're referring to a work of Aristotle, and in the process of talking about that work, it says the word Aristotle.
Okay.
But of course, Aristotle is not there. Aristotle is in Limbo.
Yeah,
But it's interesting that he is mentioned by name.
Okay, so then Sayers must have like chosen to not include it there and instead say maybe Aristotelian, and that's why Aristotle itself.
Oh yeah, it could be.
So it may have been just because it's not there in the specific keyword anymore.
I suppose if you just searched for Aristot,
I'd
like
have
as
no.
a word.
All I did was whole word. I'd have to do is
Right.
non-whole word portions.
Right.
And I can do that later, but we'll let you finish it off because we were on 145 to 151. We were almost done with the reading. Then we can really get into
145. Okay, I cannot all of them portray in full because so drives me onward the long theme that many times the word comes short of fact. The sixfold company in two divides, another way my sapient guide conducts me, forth from the quiet to the air that trembles, and to a place I come where nothing shines.
Yeah. And see, this is
There's a you in portray, which is charming.
The other thing I was going to say is the choice of word sapient guide here really it didn't confuse me. It struck me as like poignant because he only refers to sapient instead of using the word wise very rarely, and it is almost always to do with either Virgil or Homer. Almost always. And I wonder if there's like a personal significance to this, or if he's trying to make it significant to us, the reader, or if that's us in modern.
Wait, what? Say that again.
Sapient instead of using wise.
Right.
Because he only ever
sapient just meaning thinking, right?
Wise thinking to be more accurate, but yes. Like Homo sapiens sapiens means wise man, or double wise man. Like it is literally wise thinking.
The wisest of the animals.
Yeah.
Dubious claim, but
which is yeah. But what all I mean is like it makes me wonder if we in modern times, because of our like contextual like analysis of these things, we may interpret more into it. Or if the fact that he only seems to use it, he only seems to use it in reference to, hi cat, that he only seems to use it in reference to Virgil or Homer, that it is him trying to delineate them as the wisest of the wise in hell. So, the fat boy decided that he's going to be a attention whore at the moment too, because I haven't been showing him attention all morning.
So the word is savio.
Okay, so is this maybe just the people choosing sapient, or does that translate Italian to sapient?
Translates savio into sapient. In this case, which means wise.
Okay, just making
it's
sure.
It could be a cognate for savior, which is interesting, but because he's literally is somebody who saves Dante, right? Like he's, so I get that sense from it as well. Interesting, Sayers omits it. He just says my guide. He doesn't say sapient. She's probably trying to save syllables, trying to get the beats in order. But at any rate, that's yeah. But this is, I mean, obviously there's only one person who's guiding him, right? It's
well, yeah,
it's
but he
Virgil.
also from what I saw the English version at least, the word only ever also gets used with Homer and Virgil, like it's never anybody
Right.
else. And so like that was just one of those things. It just was that intentional, subconscious, something that actually means anything at all.
Oh, I think he considers Virgil to be wise for sure.
Well, but why only him and Homer get because other people just get wise applied to them, not sapient. Like that's what I mean. Like it seems to be It
Oh,
seems
you
to
mean
be
why does Longfellow translate it that
yeah,
way? Is that what you're
yeah.
asking?
Well, it seems to be like
Probably for the beat.
maybe.
It's 3 syllables in sapient. We might needed to string things out somehow. I don't know.
Stop messing with shit, cat.
Or maybe like sapient and savio both have the same sort of metrical construction, right? It's stressed, unstressed, unstressed.
Okay.
So maybe he just needed those beats. It could be as simple as that.
And that could be also the choice for. I mean, funnily enough, that could also be the choice for Dante.
Or it could be. Yeah.
Like you have to see. This is what I mean. Like, does it mean anything, or is it just a handy?
I
Choice?
mean, I default to assuming it means something, but
I did too.
I don't think he makes any choices strictly just for the beats. But I think the beats are going to influence which words he chooses. So yeah, I mean, but I don't think there's anything all that unusual about describing. I don't like. Obviously, he's going to see Virgil as wise, right? So
Well, no, I was just
but
talking
you-
about the delineation. Like, it seems like they're trying to delineate those two specifically from the rest of the wise people that he meets along the way. I thought it seems
that he's Savio and everybody else is something else.
Yeah, like they're just it'd be like in modern times it'd be like arguing the difference between intelligence and wisdom.
Right.
Like,
Yeah. I'm sure there are some like nuanced differences between different synonyms for intelligence.
Yeah, and that's just kind of how and I don't know which it may be because like it's how it reads to me is like he's trying to create a delineation, but I could be taking that in because I drew a delineation for those two. That could be me putting my own shit into it. Because Homer is one of the greatest epic poets ever. Like, if not the greatest epic poet ever. And Virgil is probably one of the most...
where is Homer? Oh, here it is. 88. He's sovereign. He's a sovereign poet.
Well, and later he's referred to...
But I don't think sovereign is wisdom. I think that's a whole different thing. He has it's almost as like a sovereign has almost like sort of ownership rights to like a category, right? He is basically the king of poets.
Transition to this. So
It's like he has squatting rights on being poets because you could argue that he is the first great epic poet in the Western tradition, in the Western canon.
Yeah.
I don't know who you would put before Homer and consider Western. Obviously, he wouldn't include like Gilgamesh in all of this, but
Cat, stop it.
and coming second is Horace. I thought that was interesting.
Okay, so in the Italian. No.
Last,
Okay,
that
so
would be a good.
Okay, so in Italian, it's poet sovrano. So it's not even the same root in Italian.
Poeta sovrano.
Yeah, but that's yeah, that's so
like literally sovereign poet.
The English and the Italian are not lining up with the same Okay. Because later it's the...
What do you mean? It's sovereign?
No, I'm looking at the Italian later. It shows up Sovrano later, and later they call it Wise Homer. So it's an English choice that's making the difference, and my misunderstanding, not that... Here it calls him Sovereign. In other places it calls him Savio. Like, it calls him the Wise, the Sapient. So it's like, it's or it doesn't call them that. It calls him Sovrano at each time. So it's the English people making the choice.
Wait, no. It is different because it's for Homer is Sovrano.
No. Later, Sovrano is used for Homer too, not in Canto 4, in other cantos. I just searched it in the Italian version. It is English. It is always Sovrano, poeta Homer.
But look at what Sayers does. Sayers spells sovereign the Italian way. So I think she's making a different. I think she's trying to point out that sovereign has different implications in Italian than it does in English, and so she's making a distinction between sovereign, as she puts it, and sovereign, the way we put it. So obviously they're cognates, but at the same time, she's specifically maintaining the Italian word for some reason, and I don't know why.
Because the next word she uses is Lord. Um, Instead of a sovereign poet, he is the poet's sovereign lord. And probably to put sovereign lord when referring to somebody other than God for Sayers would have been problematic. So she used the other spelling to prevent that issue.
Well, I see
mean,
that
that's just
problem
my
with
interpretation.
Lord.
Well,
I see that
because
problem
she
with
added
Lord,
that part
but
too. Because,
but at the same time, like we say Lord for humans all the time.
Well,
like,
no, it's
kinda hard for me
because
to-
she combined the two that she chose the Italian spelling and then Lord as opposed to the English spelling and then Lord to create the same poetic line that she wanted, but without creating like a problematic interpretation by somebody later. If that makes sense. Like
Yeah, I'm curious now what Sayers might say in her images section,
ooh, yeah, that'd be good.
because
But
certainly Homer's going to be described here, right?
well, yeah, and the reason I said when I looked in the Italian, he's always referred to with that poeta sovereign, like the sovereign. So. It is in the English version where Longfellow later refers to him as Wise Homer. He is changing it to wise as opposed to sovereign, not Dante changing it. If that makes sense. So that's where my misunderstanding came in, because once I pulled up the Google Doc, I then started Google searching the words, or not Google searching the words, keyword searching the words, in the Italian document that Ancom sent me, because I can't read it, but I can keyword search it. That makes it a lot.
Also, where is La Città Dolente?
Huh?
I don't see it. Notes 1 is it the beginning? No, I don't see it. Maybe I'm looking at the wrong. Oh, it's in Canto 3. That's why. The Città Dolente is. I'm trying to figure out all the like topographical like demarcations.
Okay.
The city of desolation.
Okay, well, at that, I'm going to end this portion of the stream. We're going to start right back up. I'm just going to end this portion because we're done with the reading. Okay, so this was Canto 4, everybody. So then we did a lot of distractions, but they all were pointed to the conversation. Maybe not to your professor, but definitely to the understanding of what we're reading. Because, like, as we're pointing out, like, Rich likes to say all translations are lies. I call all translations art because they are not a strict copy. They are always an interpretation in and of itself, and usually have their own beauty and meaning there too, because this will give you how these things were interpreted.
I'm being
over
hyperbolic.
time. No, I know. I was just for me. I go the other way. Because to me it's an art form. Because like the best translators are the ones who seem to grab the meaning of the original author rather than just one-to-one copying the words on the page. Especially when you start talking poetry, that becomes really important. And like that's all. And I think that when we look at this, it also gives us essentially little time capsules. Because each one of these commentaries and translations happens at a different period of time, and like therefore would have different socio implications of the author or the translator themselves. That is then like going to be carried into the work and how they viewed certain things. So like it gives certain value depending on how this is being read. If you were looking at Dante as a theological work, which many people do. This now becomes much more nuanced, important into the theology. If you're just looking at this as a literary poetry work, this becomes less important on the history, but the way they interpret it really matters to how we interpret the poem from its original language, since the original language is lost on most people. So it is valuable to see these differences. And while we may reference other ones like Musa and Chiardi, I'm sorry I don't put those on screen. Um, Keeping two of them on, because I did at one point try to get three different translations into the same page. Um, Trying to keep three of them on even made everything so small that I would never be able to keep both translations in large, like where I'm looking at multiple tersets at a time and read it. Like it just became problematic. So like we will mention like once I start filling in the descriptions, I will list a lot of these commentaries and people that we are listing and where you can find either access to them on Internet Archives or some of them that are in public access. You can get free PDFs for them. This is we are going far more in depth than the average high school class will. This is more university level type analysis of this information. If your high school teacher asks you a question on this, they are probably wanting the textbook answer on most of this, which is going to be more what Rich gives in certain respects, because as he calls it, although I think wrongly so, he calls it a naive interpretation start. They're going to want you to just look at the words on the page. They're not going to want you to overall consider a lot of the history. In high school, I didn't even know there were commentaries on this shit when they taught it to me. They just said read the book, and the book was just a poem. So take that how you will, depending on who's watching this. And until next time, catch you later.